I'd like to go ahead and call this special called meeting of the Board of Trustees for Greenville County Schools to order. This is a meeting called at 4:00 p.m. on the 25th for the purpose of reviewing the evaluations of our internal auditor. We're now in official business. I'll accept a motion to go into executive session for personnel matter.
Second.
Have a motion properly made and seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll go in executive session and return at the appropriate time. Okay, we will reconvene the board in public session at 5:24. We have left executive session where no action was taken. I believe we have a motion.
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, on June the 25th, 2019, the board completed the Chief Audit Executive's annual performance evaluation. Mr. Rick Barber had a very positive review, and the board continues to be thankful for his integrity, objectivity, and competency in the performance of his duties and responsibilities. Mr. Barber will receive the same raise as non-teaching district employees.
Is that a...
That's a motion, sir.
Okay. Have a motion properly made and seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion as stated, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Rick, thank you very much for your dedication and your service to the cause. And we look forward to working with you for the next years to come. Thank you very much. Is there a motion to adjourn this special call meeting?
Motion to adjourn special call meeting.
I have a motion properly made and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. So ordered. And we're out. Thank you. I'd like to call our meeting for June the 25th, 2019 of the Board of Trustees for Greenville County Schools to order. I'd like to welcome everyone and thank you for being with us tonight. At this time, I'm going to ask that everyone please rise for our prayer given by Mrs. Morrison Fair and our Pledge of Allegiance, which will be introduced by Mrs. Levinus Wells.
Let us pray. Coming together is a beginning. Working together is success. Keeping together is progress. But staying together means that we cared enough to find ways to make it work. As we celebrate our successes and learn from our challenges, guide us to act with wisdom and a common purpose, advancing public education, promoting student learning, protecting school safety, and serving as positive leaders for our community. Amen.
Mrs. Levinus Wells.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to introduce Madison Laster. She's a fifth grader student at Lake Forest Elementary School. Madison has kept an A average during her school years. She participates in chorus, LFTV, school store, and has a love for art. Her teacher, Phyllis Green, has recommended her. Brandy is a graduate. Her mother is a graduate of Wade Hampton High School, and Madison has recently been accepted into the ARMS Visual Arts program at the Fine Arts Center for 2019-2020 school year. Madison has a very rare autoimmune disease called juvenile
dermatomyositis.
Exactly. JDM. Madison is fighting for medical remission. Despite all of the obstacles she faces, she shows true strength and character. She does not let JDM stand in her way of excelling in all she does. I want you to know she had a treatment yesterday, and she is here with us today. So at this time, Madison, if you would be so kind as start us with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Please be seated. have no speakers this evening, so we will move to our next item of business in order, which is the election of officers. This will be for the, yeah.
May I just interrupt for just a
second.
moment? First of all, I'd like to thank you for your leadership, your commitment to education, all you've done
Yes, ma'am.
for Greenville County School District. And on behalf of the school board, we'd like to just give you just a small token of appreciation.
Not another bear, is it?
It is, matter of fact. It is a bear. You know I love bears.
Y'all had to see the bear 2 years ago. It was bigger than me.
But it's a smaller bear. It's a bear because I know that you're doing work on your big cookout area in the back.
Yes, ma'am.
And I know that you're a fan of Home Depot.
Yes, ma'am.
And all of the board members, we can't wait until you complete this construction so that you can have us all over for a cookout. And we'd just like to contribute to it, and we just thank you for everything.
Thank you
you've
very
done.
much.
That's
My bear.
the bear. That's your Home Depot.
Of course, you don't see anybody here offering to help me do a dirt thing in the backyard. Okay. You know, I can go home and get talked to like that, Roy. Okay. Anyway, see it fits. I can wear this to a Clemson game, Tom. Okay. We now move to our election of officers. And for the record, board doc shows that my name is listed as a consideration for board chair for July 1, 19 to June 30, 2020. That is not the case. So for the record, Sherry, would you make sure that that is documented accordingly? So we now have the officer elections. This comes from the Secretary Treasurer. She's the one that's been keeping the lists. So the roster of candidates currently are for chairman of the board for the next term is Linda Levinas Wells. There are no other candidates eligible to serve in this position or be nominated, excuse me. So with that being said, the chair will entertain a motion that we elect Mrs. Levinas Wells as chairman of the board. Is there a motion?
I move to elect Ms. Levinas Wells.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor of the motion as stated, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Good luck. The next item of business in order is the election of the vice chair. We have two candidates for this position, Mr. Lewis and Mrs. Wells. We will vote by a show of hands for each of these individuals one at a time. We'll start with in alphabetical order, Mr. Lewis. Those in favor of Mr. Lewis as board chair, would you please vote accordingly? Okay. All those for Mrs. Wells, would you please vote accordingly? We have a 6-6 tie. Doug? We have to keep voting until somebody changes their mind, right? Yes, sir. Okay. So we'll go back to Mr. Lewis. Well, I'll tell you what, let's do. I'm going to put two of you on the spot. I'm going to ask each of you to take about a minute and share with us why you think you should be vice chair. How's that? It's a tie.
You want me to go first?
Go right ahead.
I mean, I would appreciate the opportunity to work my way up through the ranks. I was officer in the advocacy committee and would like to be vice chair as I work towards being chair of the board. I think that Ms. Levinas Wells will make an excellent chair, and I look forward to supporting her in that role.
Okay. Mrs. Wells?
So I've been, sat in the chairman's seat for a couple of years and enjoyed that work and have now been out of it for a couple of years and would like the opportunity to be back on the executive team and help move things. We've got a lot of stuff going on, a lot of good stuff, and I just would like the opportunity to serve and be part of the leadership team to continue to move things forward. I think I bring a perspective that I think the board appreciates and would like to just be able to use that to help the executive team.
Okay. You've now heard from the two interested trustees for the position, so let's vote again. All those in favor of Mr. Lewis to serve as vice chair, please vote accordingly. Okay, and Mrs. Wells, vote accordingly, please. We still have a 6-6 tie. How about if we take the two of you in a room, close the door, and whoever wins comes out?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Lewis.
I'd be happy to change my vote to Ms. Wells.
Okay.
Thank you.
So Mrs. Wells is the vice chair. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, ma'am.
So I just want to say, I think it's got to look really weird to you. It feels really weird to us because Derek and I work very closely. Anybody that sits in the boardroom, you see us go back and forth all the time. And we're great. We are great coworkers. We think we're both strong board members. And we talked about the possibility of this happening tonight, and both just said, it's okay. I mean, that's what we do. We're both very passionate about what we do, and we both bring something to the board that all the board appreciates. So it is not in any way a reflection on our work together and what we can accomplish that this happened. So, and I appreciate you letting me have it. Thank you.
You know what's really dangerous is I get to move to your seat. And Michelle, you want to reconsider the vote? Okay. Okay, our next item of business is the election of the secretary. There is one declared nominee for this, Mrs. Glenda Morrison Fair. The chair will entertain a motion to elect Mrs. Morrison Fair.
Move to elect Ms. Morrison Fair as secretary.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you very much, and we now have our officers, and good luck to all of them. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I'm just so glad that you withdrew your name, so we didn't have to get into a vote. But I want you all to know that this board is excellent, and we have a great working relationship, and I look forward to working with Lisa and Glenda and making great decisions for our district as well as our board. So we thank you all for all that you do to make our jobs easy for us. Thank you.
The next item of business in order is the adoption of the consent calendar. Is there a motion?
Motion to approve.
I have a motion duly made. Is there a second? Okay. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Dr. Royster, you have any introductions?
I do. I have some introductions based on the personnel actions as well as some that are being introduced tonight that were acted upon in the earlier meeting this month. Start with our new principal to Washington Center, Tisha Hare. Tisha, if you'd stand to be recognized. Welcome to Greenville County Schools. We look forward to you serving in your new leadership role as the principal at Washington Center, coming to us from the, I guess really all 7 Spartanburg school districts where you served as the center principal for the special needs center that serves all 7 districts. So we're glad to have you in Greenville and look forward to your work with us and your leadership. Welcome. Next introduction is our newly appointed principal for Lakeview Middle School, Kathy Dobbins. Kathy's with us here on the front row. She's was approved earlier this month and actually already been at work some, and we are most glad to have you in that leadership role at Lakeview and look forward to your service there. I believe that you have someone accompanying you, part of your family.
Yes, this is my husband, Tom Dobbins.
Some of you may recognize Dr. Dobbins, and we certainly appreciate the fact that he has on the right colors tonight.
That's right. And this is my new assistant principal, Stephen Hampton.
And since Kathy's already introduced him, and he has with him as his family tonight, Dr. and Ms. Dobbins. So, Stephen, welcome Really welcome back to you. You were in our district earlier and have some experiences other places. And we're most glad to have you in your new role as assistant principal at Lakeview Middle School. We also have the newly appointed assistant to the superintendent and district ombudsman, Shad Fitzpatrick. Dr. Fitzpatrick's coming to us having most recently served as principal of Gaffney High School. Dr. Fitzpatrick, we are most glad to have you in the district. Look forward to your work as our ombudsman and helping to take care of those issues that might arise from time to time that come to the district's attention. It will certainly be an interesting and eventful job for you, I am sure. But we are most glad to have you in that role. Shannon Gibson. Shannon is the newly appointed assistant principal at J.L. Mann High School. Shannon's coming to us by way of Union County Schools, if I remember correctly. And we're glad to have you in the district and look forward to your role and your work at J.L. Mann. Do you have anybody with you back? Marsha's with me. We appreciate her being here as well. Thank you for attending with him. We also have two newly appointed assistant principals, both of whom have served as AAs in our district. Allison Peak, Allison over here, who is the new AP from Berea High School. And I believe you have your husband with you as well, who is AP down at Hillcrest Middle School.
Yes, sir.
So, Allison, congratulations on your new role, and we look forward to having you as part of that leadership team in the role as assistant principal. Congratulations. And Stephen Sokol, Stephen, who is the newly appointed assistant principal for Berea Middle School, but currently serving in our district as an administrative assistant. Stephen, congratulations on your new role at Berea Middle School. Welcome, and we look forward to each of you becoming part of our leadership team here in Greenville County, or as your newly promoted role on that leadership team. And someone asked me this at the outset, could they leave after they were introduced? And customarily that is fine, but we appreciate you all spending some time with us tonight so everyone could see you and get the opportunity to meet you. Again, congratulations.
Thank you. As I stated earlier, we have no appearance of visitors, but Mrs. Wells has a presentation from a member of the state legislative delegation that she's been asked to present to the board on Representative Trantham's behalf. So, Lisa, would you please go forward and present that?
Thank you. So in January, it was School Board Appreciation Month, and our House, led by Ashley Trantham, passed a resolution. And she intended to get back here to present it to us herself, but she's been tied up, and then even tonight they're back in session in Columbia. So she asked if I would to present this on her behalf. So the House passed a resolution to recognize and honor the members of the Greenville County School Board for their dedicated labors on behalf of the school children of Greenville County. There are like 7 or 8 whereases, so I'm not going to read all of them. I'm going to read a couple. Whereas the mission of the public schools is to meet the diverse educational needs of all children and empower them to become competent, productive contributors to a democratic society and an ever-changing world. Whereas local school board members are committed to children and believe that all children can be successful learners and that the best education is tailored to the individual needs of the children. Where local school board members are responsible for ensuring the structure that provides a solid foundation for our school system. Whereas, as strong advocates for public education, local school board members are responsible for communicating the needs of the school district to the public and the public's expectation to the district. Whereas all our members have been duly elected, and this is School Board Appreciation Month, they recognize and honor the members of the Greenville County School Board for our dedicated labors. So, on behalf of the House, I'm presenting this for Ashley Trantham.
Before you leave, let's just ask the trustees if you can come down real quick so Terry can get a photograph. My apologies for the delay, but let's do that and do it the right way. Come on, Coach.
We're trying to draw this meeting out.
Lisa, if you would be kind enough to pass along to Representative Trantham our appreciation for the recognition, considering some of the stuff that goes on down there and the conversations that we have periodically, to get recognized like that is an honor, and we appreciate it. Thank you. The next item of business is the superintendent's report. Dr. Royster.
Thank you, Mr. Sailors. Good evening. It's a privilege tonight to share with you, I think, a very positive, culminating superintendent's report to the school year. Now, first, it'll be brief, and secondly, it's really good news. Class of 2017, scholarship totals, $128,088,956. Class of 2018, $138,964,114. Class of 2019, $144,453,370 in total scholarship offers or earned. Becomes even more impressive when you see that our number of graduates, as we have waves of population come through the system, we have some classes larger and smaller than the others. This year's graduating class, 4,536, is down about 100. But even though down by 100 students, you see the totals, Palmetto Fellows, down a little bit, Life and Hope up 779,000, total state scholarships up 458,000, but total scholarship offers 144 million, an increase of almost $5.5 million with 100 fewer graduates. I think that's extremely positive news. That's really kind of the ultimate culmination of all the things this board does and the things that the folks out in our schools do is, number one, our graduation, but then secondly, this is a great indicator of the next step for so many of our students and the amount of scholarships they've earned that will help them to afford that next step. So that is tonight's superintendent's report, and I'm most pleased to be able to share that with you.
Thank you, Dr. Royster. Before we get into our action items, two housekeeping items. Number one, as always, Mrs. Bush, thank you very much for the flowers. Since mine were Clemson colors, I made sure that the Dobbins left with it. And then, Mrs. Levinus Wells, you have a couple of acknowledgments.
I do. We have a student from Converse College that is studying to go into administration, and we have students from Southside High School. So did I miss anyone else? If y'all would stand up. Be recognized and be proud. There you go.
Thank you for being with us. Okay, our next item of business in order is item 6.01, innovative course approvals. Recommended motion coming from the Committee of the Whole is to approve 2 proposed local board courses. Coming from the committee requires no second. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion as presented, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Next item of business is the revision of policy MBC, Local Cultural Institutions Relations, Roper Mountain Science Center. The recommended motion coming from the Committee of the Whole is to approve the revision to policy MBC as amended. Is there any discussion? Mrs. Wells.
Yes, sir. Thank you. After reviewing the policy and looking at the other policies in tandem, I have a brief amendment that I would like to offer.
Yes, ma'am.
And that is, in the last paragraph of the policy, the first sentence says, the board authorizes the superintendent to allow the community to lease Roper Mountain Science Center. And my amendment would be to substitute and say the superintendent to allow corporate entities and nonprofit organizations to lease Roper Mountain Science Center.
Okay, we have a motion to amend by strike and by deletion and replacement. Anyway, is there a second?
I'll second that.
Have a motion made and seconded. Dr. Royster, would you like to speak to this?
Yes, sir. From the administration standpoint, we would recommend acceptance of that addendum to your motion on the floor. I believe that reflects a very sound approach to this lease, particularly considering the opportunity that lies within this and potential liabilities that might occur with it. It would certainly be something that were the board not to put it in policy, we would very strongly consider that an administrative rule, but I appreciate the fact that the board is willing to consider that as part of the policy.
Okay. Any discussion on the amendment? Mr. Chamley.
Could you read what and where that would go again?
Yeah, if,
Well, hang on. Nancy, are you in a position to put it on the screen?
If we will read it out loud.
Just go ahead and read it again. Don't worry about it.
okay, I'll read the whole sentence. Will that be helpful?
Please,
Yeah.
thank you.
In consideration of the unique nature of Roper Mountain Science Center and the support provided by the community for its advancement, the board authorizes the superintendent to allow corporate entities and nonprofit organizations to lease Roper Mountain Science Center in accordance with board policy and administrative rule and serve alcohol when the facility is not being used to provide educational programming to students.
Okay. Any, did that answer your question, Mr. Chamley?
Yes, I'm not sure that, on the screen here, we have another sentence in red. Is that new, or is that just highlighted, or? Of course, that's the result of specialized review. The sentence reads, the serving of alcohol is subject to the terms, conditions, and restrictions contained in Administrative Rule MBC. This administrative rule addresses safety and insurance liability pertaining to the serving of alcohol by entities leasing RSC.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, so
Yes.
The sentence in red is what was amended at the CAL.
Cal meeting, yes.
Yeah, so that's why it's in red, because that was the amendment we offered at the CAL. So this is an additional amendment.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. Mr. Chamley, does that answer your question? Okay, any other questions? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion is presented to amend, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
No.
Motion carries. So now we are back to the main motion as amended. Any discussion on the main motion as amended?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Sutton.
As I read this policy, it says that alcohol is going to be used at Roper Mountain Science Center because it will increase the use of Roper Mountain Science Center, and it will also serve as a means of additional financial revenue. So we're going to allow alcohol simply because it would give what to the school district? If I read the Roper Mountain Science Center is owned and operated by the school district of Greenville County. It's used principally as a teaching facility. So now we're going to do something that takes away from that and says because it's a source of revenue. I don't think that's an appropriate use of our school facilities, and I don't think it sends out the message that we want to send out to our community. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Any other questions? Hearing none. All
Roll
those-
call, please.
Yes, sir. The motion on the floor is amended. Would you please vote accordingly? Roll call, Mrs. Sherry, go ahead.
Mrs. Bush? Yes. Mr. Chamley?
No.
Mrs. Goodwin Cowell?
Yes.
Mrs. Grayson?
Yes.
Mrs. Leventis Wells?
Yes.
Mr. Lewis?
Yes.
Mr. Meek?
Pass.
Mrs. Morrison Fair?
Yes.
Dr. O'Connor?
Yes.
Mr. Sutton?
No.
Mrs. Wells?
Yes.
Mr. Meek?
No.
And Mr. Sailors?
Yes. The motion carries. Thank you very much. Our next item of business in order is item 6.03, the revision of policy JCDAC. Coming from the Committee of the Whole, the recommendation is to approve the revision of board policy JCDAC. Are there any questions?
Yes, sir.
Yes, Mr. Sudduth?
It says the policy has been revised to communicate the availability of assistance to students who are experiencing difficulties with alcohol or drugs. So we're changing this policy for that reason.
I'm going to ask Dr. Royster and Mr. Webb to respond to that, Mr. Sudduth.
There's nothing in that policy that would change the services or support that we offer provide to students with issues with drugs or alcohol.
No, it just reaffirms it in policy, but it doesn't change our practices or anything additional.
I don't see how we're telling students, someone who's having difficulty with alcohol, now we're saying there's a place where you can go and get that at. I disapprove of that. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Does that policy say that if you have an alcohol problem, there's a location you can go to get alcohol? I'm not sure what that means.
Yeah, the last two lines that were added and discussed 2 weeks ago, and the last paragraph, school counseling services may be sought by and provided to students with alcohol and drug difficulties. Students may also be referred to external drug and alcohol intervention programs. So it's not to receive alcohol, it's to get assistance or help.
Okay, that's what. I guess my question there then is, a student that is caught with alcohol on the school property, is he subject to the full disciplinary procedures that are in place, or can he say, no, I need counseling and something else other than disciplinary action?
It's actually applied in addition to the disciplinary penalty.
Okay.
And it's really, as Doug mentioned earlier, it's already our current practice. This simply puts it in policy.
Okay. And the same applies to teachers, I take it, and other staff?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So if a teacher is caught, just to clarify for me, if a teacher is caught, let's say, to use the vernacular, drunk in a school parking lot or on school property, that teacher would ordinarily be what? Fired or?
The circumstance, as you described it, without any other mitigating factors, they would most likely be arrested by law enforcement and would be terminated from employment.
Okay. There could be just breath on the alcohol on the breath, which might not rise to that level. And is that okay with us? I guess it is.
It's not okay, but it would not necessarily rise to the same level as the first scenario that you described.
So there could be other disciplinary actions taken.
Could be disciplinary action short of termination on the first offense, but coupled with counseling, with release from a physician. There would be a number of other things. We've also had people with issues like that where we have required them to maintain their employment to submit to on-demand testing.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions? Mrs. Wells.
Just a quick clarification. The sentence we have that talks about the recommended dosage of medication, now if a student's carrying a prescription that's written for them, it's now not a violation of our discipline code, right? That's new, isn't it? Has that been
No, so there's a law that allows if they can self-administer it and they have and it's prescribed doctor's certification that they should be utilizing it, then it's permissible. So that has not changed. That provision does not change anything to do with the behavior code or student discipline.
A real common example of that would be a student of the age and the ability to monitor their own blood sugar that might administer the medication necessary based on their monitoring. That would be probably the most frequent example.
Okay. But that sentence is underlined in the policy is new also.
That's correct. That is
Yeah.
new. Just a reference to make sure that is a caveat, which has always been in existence, that students who are prescribed medication who can self-administer it are allowed to carry that, just
Okay.
as Dr. Royster mentioned.
So is that, even if it's a controlled substance, like a ADD, ADHD, it'd be anything then, right?
That's correct. If they can self-administer it, but that's where you delineate between being able to self-administer. If you cannot, through a physician's statement, self-administer medication, then it must be provided to the nurse and disseminated through the nurse's office.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yes, sir. One.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Webb, we have a policy here that will assist students who are experiencing alcohol problems. How is serving it at a school function, not a school function, but a school-operated facility, aid in this?
Mr. South, I don't believe that question's for me. With all due respect, I cannot answer that question.
Dr. Royster?
Sorry, repeat your question, Mr. Sutherland.
Yes, sir. We have here a policy that says we will assist students who are having alcohol problems.
Yes, sir.
All right, now we're serving alcohol at a school facility. How does that tie in?
My understanding, if this policy, as approved, what it allows is the rental or use of that facility by outside entity, nonprofit organization, corporate entity, to host a function at which they may serve alcohol, not at a school event, or not at an event where students would be present by virtue of the fact they're a student at Greenville County Schools. So it is, I believe, from the administration's interpretation, a totally separate issue. But I think that's really a philosophical question for the board.
So it's really a source of funding.
I believe that was the stated intent when the policy was put forth for consideration.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Mrs. Wells?
With relation to the changes we're making at Roper Mountain and all the other policies, there isn't anything in any of our policies that would, philosophically, none of us are in favor of students having access to alcohol or drugs or any of those things that would be harmful to them. I think Roper Mountain is a case where we have a facility that was built largely with private dollars in a partnership with the school district, with the expectation at that time that it would be a public-private partnership and a community asset. And so I think it's a different animal than every other facility we have because of that, because it has been a public-private partnership facility for a long time. It has been open to the public for public events outside of school hours, outside of school days. They have raised money to continue to be sure that Roper Mountain can serve the public. And so I just want to clarify from my viewpoint on this with regard to that policy change is that it's a very different place and entity than our other entities in the school district. So, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Mr. Sadek?
Roper Mountain Science Center is a district-owned facility. If we're going to allow an exception to Roper Mountain, then we can allow an exception somewhere else. So it's not so much, if it was not owned by the school district, I'd have no problem with that. But it says in our board policy that it is owned by the school district. So to me, that doesn't make it any different or any separate from any other facility. If you can do it at one facility, then it won't be long, you can do it at another facility. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Any other questions? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion as stated, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
No.
Motion carries. Thank you very much. The next item of business in order is item 6.04, the revision of policy KM. Recommended motion coming from Committee of the Whole, which requires no second, is to approve the revision of Board Policy KM as amended. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion as stated, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
No.
Motion carries. Thank you. Next item of business in order is item 6.05, revision to policy KG. Recommended motion from the Committee of the Whole is to approve the revision to Board Policy KG. Requires no second. Any discussion? Mr. Shanley.
Just like an explanation of what this is for and why it's necessary and what it says, to be honest. I haven't.
Mr. Webb.
Well, the initial change to this policy was in Section 5, which puts in place except as permitted by Board Policy MBC. Now, this was also a good opportunity to update other language that doesn't change the practices, the current practices of the school district, but clarifies to what groups and how school buildings are leased and rented.
And to kind of reiterate a question I had the other day, if we rent the facility to a church or a religious institution, which I assume is possible under this, and as part of their policy to use fermented wine in their services, is that permissible?
No.
So they would have to have notice that they may not serve wine.
Correct.
Do we address that in here? I just didn't see it. That was my only problem.
Yeah, it's just addressed in other policies that alcohol is not permitted on any other facility.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Mrs. Wells?
The first sentence of that policy, just to help me, it's not something you changed, but it says the buildings and properties shall be available for community use, including partisan political events. So we don't so you can't for nonpartisan, but you can for partisan, or is that just specifying you can use it for?
When this policy was passed, it just specified partisan, I believe with the intent to communicate that it can be both partisan or nonpartisan events. I believe that was the intent.
Okay. It's not exclusionary.
It's not exclusionary.
Okay.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Mrs. I'm sorry, I was asking the superintendent something. Any other questions? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion as stated, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
No.
No.
Motion carries. Next item of business in order is item 6.06. The revision of
Number 2.
policy GBRM. Recommended motion coming from the Committee of the Whole, which requires no second, is to approve the revision to Board Policy GBRM. Are there any questions?
Yeah.
Mr. Chandler.
And once again, does this say that we are now Alcohol-free is a new term, is that right? Is that a new addition to this?
I have emphasized that in this policy, but it has always been our practice and prohibition that employees are not permitted to either drink or have consumed alcohol to be on campus.
Yeah, I guess I'm trying to make sure it applies just to the schools or to any property owned by the school board, obviously with the exception of Roper Mountain.
That's correct.
Okay. So it's been our policy, it's just never been official.
No, what was in place had language regarding this, but this puts into place and updates this policy to mirror the Drug-Free Workplace Act and comply with state and federal law completely.
So this is required by the state and federal law, not our intent to just beef up the alcohol policy? Or is it, I mean, I'm curious.
That's correct. It's most of this is required. Some of this language is beyond the law and emphasizes beyond the language of the law our prohibition of alcohol and drugs for employees.
Okay. Does it need to be made any clearer anywhere else that, with the exception of Roper Mountain, there shall be no alcohol on any school-owned or leased property? Do we need to clear up any others while we're at it, I guess is my question.
My belief is no, it is clear.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions? Mr. Sutter?
It states that the policy has been revised to include assistance for employees who are experiencing difficulty with alcohol. What has changed on that? Dr. Oyster?
No, there is no change in our practice to that.
So we've got the same assistance for employees who are having alcohol problems
Yes, sir.
before we had just changed.
Yes, sir.
So there'll be no change in it whatsoever in it.
No, sir. We currently provide that assistance either through EAP or through their medical provider.
If we currently provide it, why are we putting it in again?
Mr. Sudduth, I believed it was important, given the nature of this policy, to put a paragraph at the end of it to emphasize the support and availability of support for employees who are experiencing difficulties with alcohol and drugs.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Roy?
Just about forgot my question, but I guess it goes along these lines. If a teacher, let's say, is being treated, well, let's go back. If a teacher is observed with alcohol in the system on the premises of the school and is terminated for cause, are they entitled also to the EAP, or does that die with their termination?
They're no longer an employee, they would no longer be eligible for employee benefits, except those that would extend to them through COBRA.
That's correct.
And I don't remember the end date on COBRA, but you know, Lynn's back there. So they have 18 months through COBRA.
Any other questions? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion as stated, please say aye. Aye. All opposed?
No.
Motion carries. Thank you. Next item of business in order is item 6.07, the Champions for Public Education Award nomination. Recommended motion from Committee of the Whole, which requires no second, is to approve the nomination of Bon Secours St. Francis Health System for the South Carolina School Board Association's Champions for Public Education Award. Are there any questions? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion stated, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Next item of business in order is item 6.08, the South Carolina School Board Association resolution regarding PIBA health coverage. The recommended motion coming from the Committee of the Whole requiring no second is to approve a proposed resolution to the South Carolina School Board Association regarding PIBA health insurance coverage for school board trustees. Are there any questions? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion as stated, please say aye. All opposed?
Abstain.
Okay, thank you, sir. Sherry, Nancy, would you please, for the record, mark that Mr. Sutter abstained because he's already a participant in the program?
You know what?
Okay. Nevertheless,
I didn't vote.
no, it's okay. Next item of business in order is item 6.09, Piedmont Natural Gas ROW easement, right-of-way easement at Roper Mountain Science Center. Recommended motion coming from Committee of the Whole is to approve Piedmont Natural Gas Company Incorporated's request for a 5-foot wide permanent natural gas utility service to the Roper Mountain Science Center property. Again, coming from Committee of the Whole, requires no second. Any discussion? Mr. Meek.
Does Roper Mountain not have gas now? Is that,
Mr. Mills?
we don't want Mr. Mills to get away completely free tonight.
Well, he was trying. He was inching his way to the door.
No, sir, they do not have an existing gas service on the mountain now.
Will we be converting some of the buildings over to natural gas or what?
We're carrying this particular gas line up to Harrison Hall, but it's being installed specifically for the new environmental science and sustainability building.
Will we be thinking about converting some of the other buildings over to natural gas?
Yes, sir, potentially in the future, but that's not in the plans at the moment.
Okay. According to the diagram I looked at, it runs up to part of the hill, but
Yes,
not
sir.
all the way up, so it stops
Yes, sir.
there.
Yes, sir.
And if they wanted to continue that to go over into the neighborhoods adjacent to those.
There's already gas service in the adjacent neighborhoods.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Any other questions? Mr. Shanley?
What, does this then, it doesn't provide Roper Mountain with natural gas, but it makes it possible if they need it? Is that the idea? Or otherwise, why would you need to have that easement?
Well, the new building will have gas service too.
So that's what that's
Yes,
for?
sir.
Okay, good, thanks.
Any other questions? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion as stated, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Next item of business in order is the revision to the board self-evaluation instrument. If I can get the, okay. Recommended motion coming from the ad hoc committee for the board self-evaluation is to approve the proposed revision to the board self-evaluation instrument. Mrs. Morrison-Fair, would you like to speak to this, please?
In the interest of time, I would simply like to thank the committee members. We wanted to produce a document that we made sure that everyone on this board would be able to evaluate the job that they are doing and give credit to themselves and the people who they represent. And you have a copy of that on board docs, and a copy was sent to everybody. And that's
Thank
it.
you, ma'am. Doug, since this is coming from an ad hoc committee, do they need to make the motion, or is it? Okay. Okay. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion as stated, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Next item of business in order is item 6.11, revision to superintendent's evaluation instrument. Recommended motion coming from the ad hoc committee for superintendent's evaluation is to approve the proposed revision to the superintendent's evaluation instrument. Again, coming from a committee doesn't require a second. Mrs. Grayson, would you like to speak to your committee's work?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, I'd like to thank the committee. We worked for 3 months, I think, trying to review the strategic ed plan that we just passed and align the superintendent evaluation keeping in mind that it was difficult to do we evaluate the superintendent annually, and we just passed a strategic plan that lasted 5 years. So we struggled with that for about 3 months, then we brought it to the CAL March 14th for information only to get input from the board, and then that same day I sent out an email requesting any written comments in writing by April 15th so that the committee could look at them before the next ad hoc committee, which was April 23rd. Those members that did submit comments, we sat down with them with the superintendent and then took those comments to the committee April 23rd, and some of them were adopted and some of them weren't, but the committee approved a revised draft April 23rd, and then we did not meet in May because some of the provisions in the blueprint had budgetary ramifications. I mean, we wanted to see what happened with the budget. And it turns out that did not require substantive changes. And so we're bringing it straight to the board for approval.
Okay. Any questions? Dr. O'Connor.
Yes. I would like to ask.
Cut your mic on, please.
If you all would help me pass this motion down each way, please. Just to simplify, I've prepared what I want to say to help move it along faster, if I can pull it back up.
Here, I can share. No,
You need another one down
we
there?
got it. We can share. Go ahead, Dr. O'Connor.
Okay, it is the board's responsibility to hold the superintendent accountable for the performance of the district he or she leads, as any leader should be, and the education plan is our set of performance measures. My position that both the superintendent evaluation and the board's self-evaluation should be tied to the strategic ed plan has been known to the evaluation committee, to the superintendent, and to this board for the past several months. In fact, the board self-evaluation committee discussed and submitted to this board in the form of a motion our belief that we should include all annual goals, targets, and measures under goal number 1, which we strongly believe should be in this document. Mr. Webb later clarified that while we could share our position with the board, we could not really make it in the form of a recommendation directly to another committee, so we decided to just communicate it that way. My email yesterday only reiterated my position in advance of the board meeting today that we should add back ed plan items and measures that were left out of this proposed evaluation document. After meeting with the superintendent, I understand now that some items were excluded because they were part of a state plan, state requirements, rather than coming through the regular ed plan process, or were subsumed elsewhere or did not rise to the level of importance that the others did. I'm very thankful that he gladly agreed to include the items that were of greatest importance to our committee, which were the literacy items that had been left out. And in fact, he agreed to add something that I had not anticipated, which is wonderful. And you can see on the motion that instead of just increasing literacy programs in the middle schools, he said that he would be glad to include secondary schools so that middle and high schools would have such literacy programs, and that he would be glad to have that as part of his evaluation, which I greatly appreciate. He also agreed that because our board and district focus on literacy deserves a singular focus, he would be glad for those to be added in. And we also added one out of goal area 5 that relates to keeping our website compliance with ADA accessibility. So I would ask my colleagues to please consider accepting the following amendment. I move to amend the proposed superintendent evaluation to include the following indicators under goal area 1. And I'll be glad to provide this in writing to you, Sherry, if that will help, and that board members have it in front of them. Goal Area 1 indicators, adding annually increase the percentage of K-5 students reading on grade level in accordance with Strategic Ed Plan Goal Area 1, Performance Goal 5, and annually increase targeted literacy programs in secondary schools in accordance with Strategic Ed Plan Goal Area 1, Performance Goal 6. And finally, Goal Area 5 indicator, increase and maintain district and school websites ADA accessibility in accordance with Strategic Ed Plan Goal Area 5, Performance Goal 4. And I would appreciate your support. That was a motion.
I have a motion. Is there a second to the motion?
Second.
Okay, seconded by Mrs. Goodwin Caldwell. Any discussion on the motion or to amend, the amendment? Mr. Meek.
Thank you. This sounds fine, well and good, but I don't know what the annual increase is for the percentage of K-5 students reading on grade level, because I surely don't remember what the Strategic Education Plan Goal Area 1 Performance Goal 5 is. I don't have it memorized, and I just don't know what it is.
I believe I have it.
And that goes for the others also. You know, I mean, I don't know what they are. I would have much preferred it would come through the committee, so I would have understood it a little bit better.
I did make the recommendation to the committee.
But it didn't come through the committee.
Right. So that's why I'm bringing it to the board. Mr.
Do I have the
Royster?
floor, or does Dr. O'Connor have the floor?
Oh, excuse me.
No,
I'm
go right ahead.
sorry, you're right.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
But anyway, sometimes we make sausage in these meetings, and this is what this one would be if we pass this one. I think it, as I said, I'm not totally opposed to it, but I am opposed to the procedure it's going through and the lack of knowledge of what this means to the district. So I cannot vote for this motion tonight.
Mr. Chairman.
I'm finished.
Mrs. Grayson, you're next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And, you know, I would agree with Mr. Meek. I don't have a substantive issue with any of this except for the fact that we haven't gone back and compared it to the strategic ed plan, figured out what our targets were, what they're supposed to do. Can we measure it annually if it's a 5-year? We struggled in committee at length on if you evaluate, we're going to evaluate the superintendent using some metric in November. And if we don't go through the committee process and collaborate with the superintendent, figure out what these indicators are, which we did with those that submitted written comments. My objection is the procedure. I do not think that it is good boardsmanship to wordsmith in a board meeting on a Tuesday night with 12 people. You know, if all 12 of us submitted 7 substantive recommendations at 7:30, we would be here until 2 a.m. with the whole staff sitting here. This is why we have committees. And it doesn't matter who's chairing it. If a chair requests policies in writing and you say you'll submit them in writing, then submit them in writing. I take exception with the fact that these 7 suggestions were submitted to me as committee chair before last night. Thank you.
Okay. Mrs. Wells, Mrs. Morrison-Fair, and then
This
Mrs.
is the
Goodwin
motion
Caldwell.
we provided.
Okay.
So it is difficult to do work in the board setting often, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. And with regard to trying to do this in a board meeting, there was the opportunity, like we have done with most every other substantive policy change or committee work, to bring it back to the committee of the whole to have these discussions. So I made comments in the committee of the whole in March regarding what I thought, liked, didn't like about the instrument, what I would like to see. I did not follow up in writing with that because it was my understanding, we had the discussion in the committee of the whole, that was the point, that it's here for information, to get information back from the board. So that is how I provided my feedback. That feedback has not been incorporated. I would have loved the opportunity to have a committee of the whole meeting so that I could have talked through those, but we didn't. So we're here. So I am willing to do the hard work and stay as long as we have to stay if we need to do the work in the boardroom. What I heard, what I'd like to have confirmation on is what I heard is, I'd like to hear from Dr. Royster, these 3 indicators that are recommended to be added, they're in the strategic ed plan, just like these other indicators that are in the document. Dr. Royster, can you speak to these items and their inclusion in the evaluation? Would you be willing to? Or Mr. Sailors, would you ask Dr. Royster if he would be willing to?
Oh, sure. See, I want to say this. As Dr. O'Connor indicated, I don't have a problem with the contents of those 3 items. I don't. We would report on those as a part of my evaluation in the same way we would report on the others. And here's where we are, here's how much we've moved, or not moved as the case may be. Now, I don't believe it would be appropriate for me to comment on your procedure, how you choose to follow that or not follow that. I only say to you, I have no issue with these 3. Dr. O'Connor and I met this afternoon. I explained to her, as she said to you all, and what I sent you all via email earlier today, the ones I had concern with and why I had particular concerns with that. Obviously, this is a decision for the board. I would say that I very much appreciate the manner in which the board committee conducted this and being included in all those discussions and having the opportunity to fully discuss with that committee, well, here's the impact of putting this in, here's the impact to putting this other alternate in. I appreciate that opportunity to have a say and a voice in what ultimately becomes the evaluation of my performance. I think hope that answers your question without me delving over into the business of the internal operation of the school board.
You did an excellent job. So, Mr. Chairman, I have some comments on the main motion, the approval, but I'm okay right now with the amendment.
We're currently discussing the information that Dr. O'Connor has
so I'm
brought forward.
Cede the floor for now. Thank you.
Mrs. Goodwin-Caldwell, I'll get there in a second.
Thank you, Dr. Royster, for meeting with Dr. Cristobal O'Connor, because when she sent out that information, it had more than these 3. And with these 3 being added, and they're already in the strategic ed plan, I think that it is needed in this evaluation. And when Mr. Meek said that he didn't know what the performance goal was for those different things, it looks like in this evaluation, you pick and chose which performance goals you were going to put in this evaluation. And if it's in the strategic ed plan, you should include all of them and not just some, picking and choosing which ones you want to put in there. And since Dr. Royster did say that these were okay, I'm okay with adding these to the superintendent's evaluation. Thank you.
Okay, Mrs. Morrison, fair, and then back to Dr. O'Connor.
Okay. I would just like clarification. These are amendments to the main motion. Okay, so it would be 1.7, 1.8 under goal 1, and under goal 5, 5.5, in addition to the bullet points.
Can you offer clarification on that?
Yes, it would be
additions, not
No,
substitutions.
they are,
Additions.
these are amendments by addition.
Addition, okay, that's, okay. I
So-
understand, and also after Dr. Royster spoke, that answered my second question. And so I have always been of the opinion, I wanted the superintendent and everyone concerned to be part of the superintendent evaluation, including the superintendent. So if he's okay with this, I'll weigh in on that also. I'm okay with it.
Dr. O'Connor?
Yes, I just wanted to say, Mr. Meek, I didn't have the paper before me when you asked. I apologize for that. But the targets for each are as follows. Annually increase the percentage of K-5 students reading on grade level as defined by Fontes and Pinnell, Fastbridge, MAP, and other district measures.
You are addressing it through me, right? Okay, that's fine, go ahead.
The second one is meet annual targets so that by 2019-2020, targeted literacy intervention classes will be provided in secondary schools. So the last one I do not have.
Okay, thank you, Dr. O'Connor. Are there any other questions? Mr. Sutton?
I got the email from Dr. Royster on proposed amendments to the superintendent's evaluation instrument. And on here, there are several that are included. What about, and there's only 2 of those that are in this amendment here. What about the other things that were included in there?
I'm going to ask Dr. Royster and Dr. O'Connor to answer that because they were in the conversation, I was not.
Yes, sir, Mr. Suddeth. As I understand it, there were some few of these that were special requirements by the state that didn't really come through the process and the ed plan the way the others had through our stakeholder involvement, and a couple of others that were subsumed elsewhere. So these were the only ones that had actually altogether been omitted that were part of the actual ed plan in the typical way that they were generated, especially the literacy goals that had been left out. So do you have anything to add to that, Dr. Royster?
I guess another way to look at that, Mr. Suddeth, the ones that you see before you that Dr. O'Connor put forth a motion about after our conversation today, they represent, for lack of a better term, the big picture items. Maybe not necessarily that accessibility one, that's not to the level of the literacy, but still it's an important one. The others are either all covered in other areas. For example, there's one in there specifically about AP courses for GT students. That's a particular requirement of the state to have that in there, but we have an item already in there. I don't remember what number it is. The one dealing with all the accomplishments of Graduation Plus. Item 1.4 actually contains that within it. So that's unnecessary. It's a duplication. So what came out of that is the big one, which is really literacy, and although it's 2 separate things, it addresses literacy grades K through 12. It could really have all been written in one, actually. But the 2 that are numbered 1.7 to 1.8, they deal with literacy from grades K through 12, which is the cornerstone of really all the other academic achievement areas.
Clarify for me, Dr. Royster, you've got a 3.3 in goal area 3 indicator. Increase the percentage of students who describe teachers as caring in accordance with strategic education plan goal area 3 performance goal number 4. Is that going to be included in your evaluation?
No, sir. And the reasons that are listed there have to do with the lack of reliability of the survey instrument, the fact that they can change the instrument at any time, the very low response rate we have on it, and the fact that it is one question that is asked on one particular day. And another example in there, and I think I listed that, at the secondary level, you could choose these various attributes of your teacher, one of which is caring, but there are like 6 that are very positive that would indicate you had a very positive and good relationship. One might argue a caring relationship, but you can only pick, I think it's 4 of them. Well, if you don't happen to pick caring, you could pick 4 that reflect a very positive relationship. So those were the reasons not to include that.
Explain to me, Dr. Oyster, why the inclusive targeted literacy programs, and we started out with middle schools, and now we changed it to secondary schools.
Well, my concern with that is it's too narrow. Why are we only going to say that I need to be doing something in K-5 in middle school, when in fact we are doing something in high school, and I believe that is equally important to the other 2 grade levels. That was my suggestion. If you were going to put in there about middle school, if that were to be added, that we would add high school as well.
Well, what I see here is only talking about secondary.
Which would be both, middle school and high school.
It's not talking out middle school.
Yes, sir. Secondary would include middle school and high school.
Is that found throughout your evaluation? Secondary is 6 through 12?
Yes, sir. That would be our common definition of secondary is grades in our district is grades 6 through 12.
Okay. All I have. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Lewis?
Thank you. So, I was originally inclined to have some concerns with the number of changes that were proposed by email, and I appreciate that there are fewer today. And I particularly appreciate that the superintendent's had a chance to weigh in on them, although I do agree that I wish this board would make a decision whether this kind of work is done in committee or it doesn't. And we have committees doing work, and then we sometimes bring it and want to amend it, and sometimes we don't want to amend it because we worked too hard on it in the committee. I feel like there's inconsistency among individual board members about whether the amount of time a committee spends working on something should validate their work or not. So I believe that committee work is essential to getting the sausage made. There is though a sentence that I do want to talk about because it has made me think differently about this amendment or any other amendment. So on the first page of the superintendent's evaluation, it's bolded in the second paragraph, and I just want to read it because as I'm reading it, I want to make sure that I'm reading it correctly, because it pertains to whether we need to add more indicators or not as an amendment.
Okay.
So it specifically says indicators may serve as a guide to the evaluator in assessing each of the 6 goal areas. Individual indicators are not rated and may or may not be used as a sole guide for an evaluation. So what I'm reading here is that the only thing that we are evaluating the superintendent on is the big goal, which in the case of goal 1 is the superintendent delivers high-quality curriculum, instruction, and interventions that meet the needs of each student. We're not evaluating the superintendent on each of the individual indicators below, but on the big goal. So whether we have 6 or 150, there's still one question, which is, does he do this big goal or not? So to me, my objection would be that if that's true, we don't need any indicators because we have an ed plan that has all the indicators. And so my recommendation would be that we not support this amendment, but that we strike all the indicators out of all the goals and just refer to the ed plan in each of the goals. Because the ed plan is 144 pages long, and we are picking and choosing indicators based on our own personal interests and leaving out wide swaths of the ed plan. I mean, there's nothing in here about choice. There's very little in here about staff recruitment and retention, things that the board also said were priorities, although maybe not as vocally because individual board members put them in rather than having to fight to get them added. So my recommendation would be that we vote against this amendment, and that we have a second amendment that removes all indicators so that every word in the ed plan is treated equally in this evaluation.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. Mr. Meek?
I guess I really appreciate Dr. O'Connor and Dr. Royster getting together without the committee today and bringing this amendment forward. You know, we spent several months on making sausage that we thought was what to evaluate the superintendent on. You know, I don't think, as I sat and looked at the strategic plan, looked at when we approved that, that was not to evaluate the superintendent on, or else we would have done some things differently. We may not have voted on some things, as Mr. Lewis brought up. There's a whole swath of things that we didn't put in the evaluation. And I don't know that the superintendent, we discussed on items that we thought we could hold him accountable for. And as I said, I'm not totally opposed to this amendment. I'm just totally opposed to knowing what the results, the consequences of this amendment would be. I just don't know that. And, you know, it's been quite a while since I've had any dealings with the strategic ed plan, and I don't have it. And as Dr. O'Connor admitted, she didn't have the last one handy either, even reading from the other two that she has access to that I do not. You know, and so I totally object for us coming here to the board meeting and making an amendment that could be very substantial to the superintendent's evaluation. Although he may have agreed to it, I didn't agree to it as a committee. I don't know that I want to agree to it yet. And so I cannot support the amendment tonight.
Okay. Mrs. Grayson?
Yeah, I just wanted to speak briefly to the process and why everything in the blueprint wasn't just lifted. We started with just lifting everything in the blueprint. We actually assigned each committee member one section. You know, there's 5 goals in the blueprint, and then we kept the tone from the top, which is in the existing rubric, and tried to figure out what is measurable on an annual basis in a 5-year plan. So we started by including everything, and then through conversations with the superintendent, and I mean, we had a lot more data in there, but it didn't make sense. It didn't read right to have, you know, increase this by 2% because it's a 5-year plan that is going to change. The constitution of this board is going to change, the superintendency is going to change, and the strategic ed plan is going to change. And so, I personally think that we need to have an evaluation rubric, which is just a tool that we don't change every year. I mean, I chaired this committee 2 years ago, and I do not want to do it again for these very reasons. I mean, you know, our goals are going to change, and the superintendent evaluation, to some degree, is always going to be subjective. Mr. Lewis is right. I mean, there's a comment section, and you could basically have 6 goals, and you could write comments on all 145 pages of the ed plan. But the issue that I think that you will find is that some of them are true long-term goals, and this has to be done every 12 months at a minimum. And so, and to Dr. Royster's point, we didn't vote on the strategic ed plan with a view towards evaluating the superintendent for all 145 pages. My recollection, and we can go back and review the tape, is that we put stretch goals in there without regard to budgetary considerations. And so I'm just explaining the process by which some of these things in the blueprint were lifted. It's not that we picked and chose, it's that we had everything in there and we tried to make sense of it in a way that would make sense on an annual basis. So we didn't just go through and say, okay, Glenda, you want these 3, and Linda, you want those 4, and Roger, you want these 3, and okay, let's just ignore the rest of it. You know, we had several objections, primarily because they were subject to the board passing the money, and that didn't happen by the time this came out of committee, which is why we didn't wait till May. As it turned out, we had a really good budget this year, and we didn't have to take anything out which was a concern. And if we had had budgetary issues, if the budget hadn't passed, then we'd probably still be in the committee stage. So I just want the board to understand the process by which everything in the blueprint, it wasn't included in the final proposed draft.
Okay. Mrs. Bush? You didn't have your hand up? Okay. Roy?
I guess I'm a little perplexed by all of this because I have questions on about a half a dozen different levels, and I'm going to try to keep them fairly close to home. But the first thing I guess I would say is I have a long-standing belief that it is unfair to give a superintendent, or any employee for that matter, objectives that he doesn't know whether he can meet them or not. And at the end of the year, we give that person a grade based on whatever was the secret objective in our minds, and he never knew what they were. I think that's totally unfair. As to the entire ed plan, I think it sort of goes without saying that when you have a particular specific objective, and you have maybe 4 or 5 of those, that does not mean you don't have to pay any attention to the rest of that ed plan. That's going to always be a part of your objective. And if you drop one of those big ones big time, that's going to have an impact on your overall evaluation at the end of the year. But my question here is, I think we were asked to submit written comments or suggestions to the chair of that committee, and I don't know, but I was told I was the only person that submitted any, and I spent 2 or 3 pages going through why I thought what I was going to suggest. And we had a meeting with the 3 people involved, that is the chair and the superintendent. I came away from that meeting thinking that that was going to be what we did. What I had suggested, very minor objective metrics, and I thought that was okay. We went right next door into the committee meeting, and within one fell swoop, they were all knocked out. So I do have a little bit of a concern when we say, look, if a committee says it, it ought to be law. That's why we have board meetings, and that's why we have CAL meetings, because if a committee says it, it still has to get passed by the majority, and the majority ought to have a chance and an opportunity to make comments on that committee presentation or motion. The only thing we do about a committee motion is that it doesn't require a second, and that's just expediency. But other than that, that's why we have these meetings, to discuss them. And if the committee is entirely ignoring one or more individuals, I think it is perfectly acceptable for that individual or more individuals to make a motion either in the CAL or in the full board meeting to address those issues. So I don't have a problem with the discussion we're having right now, but I will say that I do think it is bad for us to treat the superintendent in such a way that he doesn't know what our objectives are. But guess what? Everybody on this panel has an objective. I have one. I don't even know what it is yet. But when I look at his report next year, I'll decide what that is. And his poor thing, he won't have any idea whether he's done well or not. So I think that's a really bad way to manage our superintendent. And I would propose that we do need to have some sort, and I don't see any still even in these, maybe there are, but I think we need to have some sort of objective standard that he needs to be able to try to meet. If he doesn't meet them, or she, if she's sometime a she, that doesn't mean they get fired on the spot. It just means that what we then need to do is kind of get an idea of why couldn't you? For example, are any of these objectives that we're talking about here, whether they're in the motion or the additional motion, are they going to cost any money? And if we're going to meet an increase of 3% literacy in our K-5 students, are we going to need to hire more teachers? And if we're not going to give the superintendent the money to do that, then it's a little disingenuous for us to try to hold him to that standard. On the other hand, I hope that our superintendent recognizes that these are objectives that he needs to be preparing for every year, and when he submits the budget, that be included and it be explained at that time. So at the end of the year, if the objectives are not met, I would hope and expect there'd be some explanation. And if there's not, then we need to take some sort of plan to kind of beef it up a little bit. And that will be my comment.
Okay, Dr. O'Connor, then Mrs. Goodwin-Caldwell, and then Mrs. Grayson.
Yes, would you pass that down for me? Would you pass that for me, Joyce? This I'm handing out because of the comment a minute ago about how we talked about breaking it down to a few key areas, and the superintendent and I talked about it too, that we never really got around to, as a board and with him, narrowing that whole huge ed plan into a few key areas. But I leave this with you all to say that at the recent NSBA conference I attended, this was from a Texas district, and the superintendent and chairman presented together, and the superintendent said, my evaluation is directly based on these goals, and everything we do is aligned. So it's the way we're doing it is not simple and straightforward like we hoped it would be or are trying to get to. But I do want to say that one of the many committees we had recently that Ms. Bush managed, we brought back multiple Cal meetings and took input, and she, on multiple occasions, went back to try to address the fact that the board was not comfortable or did not feel ready to support it. And nobody said, out of the group mentioning it tonight, oh my gosh, how unfair to Ms. Bush and the others on the committee that we're ripping it up every time they walk in here. But that's what you all wanted to do because you didn't like the policy changes we were making. And some of us are not comfortable with this. And I just think that we shouldn't be pressured or made to feel any kind of unwelcomeness with our ideas just because we weren't heard the first several times we brought this forward. And it's just not fair to do it that way. This was not a last-minute thing. It's that I kept saying our committee and I and others want all these indicators in, and they weren't added. So this is my next opportunity to try to get them added, and I'm very happy to boil it down to the few that the superintendent can gladly get behind. And Mr. Meek, when you say you're not sure, you know, I bet if I asked you what the key indicators were on any of these in the evaluation we've been presented, it would be hard to say what those measures are in those specific goals in the ed plan. I couldn't do it, but I have told you that on these, there's no percentage or anything. It just says we're going to increase the number of kindergartners reading on grade level. And that is in the ed plan. He's endorsed it. We've endorsed it. We voted on it. So why on earth would there be a problem with adding it back in to his evaluation when he's saying, I'm happy to be evaluated on these points? Mr. Chairman, I apologize that I got my eyes locked in on the wrong man, but excuse me for that.
Are you done?
Thank you.
Mrs. Goodwin Caldwell?
Mr. Shamler said a lot of what I was thinking and what I was going to say, but when Mr. Lewis said about just using the whole strategic ed plan and just not using indicators at all, well, why don't we just get rid of all of the ad hoc committees? Because we have committee of the whole for us to come in here and discuss it. Because it seems like whenever we do go into committees, some of the stuff that, some of our concerns are just brushed to the side. So that's why we have to bring stuff into a board meeting or a committee of the whole. Since the superintendent said that it's 3, it was like 5 or 7 or I don't know how many it was in that email. But since he said he doesn't have a problem with these, I think that we should go on and put them in. And I don't want to spend all night on it either.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Mrs. Grayson?
Just briefly, you know, I do not want any board member to feel like they've been unfairly or unwelcome in their treatment. I mean, I emailed the board the day of the Cal meeting, just say, let's put in the writing so we can do it in the committee. The reason for that is so we'd have a record of what the concerns were. And we did discuss, you know, in abstract terms, specific objections, measurable performance objectives like you would see in a private corporation setting. And we had that in the draft, actually. that went to the committee meeting in April. And we discussed it thoroughly. And not every recommendation made it into the final document. That's the way committees work. Also, after the March 14th Cal meeting, when I requested comments by April the 15th, I specifically reached out to Dr. Ball O'Connor on March 31st, 2 weeks later, and requested that she give comments before spring break, which would have been Friday the 12th instead of April the 15th. And she said, sure, no problem. And I got nothing. So I just want to clarify that people that think they have been unfairly treated in this setting, the board needs to understand that everybody had the same opportunity to submit written comments. And I think it's perfectly legitimate board policy to do that in the committee setting so everybody knows what everybody else says.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
I'm taking them in order, Crystal.
Okay.
Lisa and then Derek.
You know what's happened? We've got this. We decided we liked the work we did on the strategic ed plan, and it made sense to want to align all our work to the strategic ed plan. But the reality is, it's 144 pages, and it's got a bunch of stuff in it that the state needs, that they want, and it has to be put in a certain way. And so for that reason, by itself, it's not a great document to use to set what our priorities and what are we going to focus on, not for the board or for the superintendent, because there's just too much minutia in there. Now, I read the long-range facilities plan, so I'm okay with that, but most folks aren't. So what's happened is, by default, this committee that did the work for the superintendent's evaluation have basically established the board priorities with the indicators that they show. And so I see this as it needs to be collectively all 12 board members that do have that input to be able to say, these things are important to me as well. And the committee may have discussed them in committee, but the rest of us did not have an opportunity to hear that. And I could have come to the committee meeting, yes, but then what's the point of the committee bringing it to the board? So I am in favor of adding these indicators to the instrument. I still have concerns with the instrument. As these indicators go, and maybe even some of the other ones, it doesn't bother me so much that they have money attached, because we have Mr. Knotts, what is our general fund budget? Just to engage you back in the conversation. What was our general fund budget this year?
When he started on his retirement.
Last meeting, got to put you on the spot.
A little over he doesn't care.
A little over $680 million.
$680 million. So I am not going to get hung up on saying that because some strategy on here needs money, that I'm going to have to be the one to provide additional money necessarily in a millage increase for the superintendent to do what he needs to do. So I'm in favor of this amendment and adding these indicators to the instrument. I would like to discuss the instrument because of the concerns sort of raised by Mr. Lewis with regard to what this document says about how we're going to use these indicators. But that's secondary to the amendment.
Well, as soon as we get through with this, we'll get to the main amendment.
That's, okay,
Main
so
motion.
thank you.
Mr. Lewis?
Mr. Chairman, so because this was presented as one item, but there are three substantial items, I make a motion that we divide the question into three separate questions.
Second. We have a motion to divide the item into three separate questions. I'm assuming by each topical area of
Well,
this
there's
motion.
three bullets, so in
each
succession
bullet's
order.
its own topic, right?
Yes,
Okay. Doug, is that debatable?
it is not.
Okay. I see you got the book down there. There's a new one coming out. Okay, I'm correct, it's not debatable, correct?
I don't believe it is.
Okay. Then we have a motion. We have a motion duly made and seconded to take.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, is it appropriate to advocate the same way, right? Is it appropriate to do that?
By a board vote, yes.
Yeah. Okay. So the motion on the floor is to divide the one the one amendment by addition into 3 questions, each by bulleted topical area, and the motion to amend. Does everyone understand that? Okay. All those in favor of dividing the question, say aye.
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 All opposed?
Aye.
I'm going to ask for a show of hands. All those in favor? You voted in favor?
I'm fine, if that's what they want.
Okay, I've got, wait a minute, hold your hands up again, because 1, 2, 3, 4, 6. All those against? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so the motion passes that we split them into 3 questions. So we will now go to Goal 1, indicators, annual increase of percentage of K-12 students, the first bullet point. We're now on the discussion of the first bullet point. Mr. Meek.
If I understood Dr. O'Connor a few minutes ago, it sort of cleared it up a little bit. She said there was no percentage in that education plan, Goal 1, performance, Goal 5, whatever. There was no percentage. It just, so if you increase by 1, is that correct, Mr. Chairman?
That is the chair's understanding, but I'd like to ask the administration to clarify that.
I would too.
The way it reads, Mr. Meek, is annually increase the percentage of K-5 students reading on grade level as defined by Fonnis and Pinnell, FastBridge, MAP, and other district measures. So to annually increase, not by a particular established percentage. And we would provide, as we would with any other item similar to this, in the report that I prepared to you in preparation for the evaluation, we provide you the current standing and whatever improvement, if there were improvement, that we had attained.
So if it increases by 1 student, then is that a percentage?
Technically, that's an increase. I would not say that's a significant increase. Then I think that's where it reverts back to the part that Mr. Lewis referenced earlier. When you go back to the guidance in administering the evaluation, indicators may serve as a guide to the evaluator in assessing each of the 6 goal areas. Individual indicators are not rated and may or may not be used as a sole guide for an evaluation. So basically, it leaves that to each of the 12 board members' individual judgment as to how much weight or lack thereof they might place on whatever I reported there, which is very similar to the current evaluation.
And who is going to keep track of this?
The things related to student achievement, obviously Dr. McCreary's office already tracks those items. Those would be normally available. In fact, you generally receive those in your fall testing report.
Okay. The 3% that some board members mentioned, that's not in this number 1 category?
That would then, in my opinion, revert back to your judgment. Whether if you thought it ought to be 3% and it was only 2%, that would be a judgment you'd render as an individual board member. Now, I would provide you the information and said, well, it's 2%, and here's why we believe it's 2%. And again, you would render your individual judgment as you do now.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Any other questions related to this amendment, Mr. Chambly?
What is the, excuse me, what is the current percentage of K-5 students reading on grade level?
I don't have that readily available in front of me tonight. We'd have to go back and pull the test score report. I don't know if Dr. McCreary knows that off the top of his head.
All right, if I throw out a wild guess that it's about 50%, would that be a good number?
I think you're using the number of students who meet the standard on the ELA test, and that's partially a reading test, but not fully a reading test. But, I mean, yeah, you could certainly use that number as example.
All right. Is that acceptable to us? These are children. We're putting 50% of them out to pasture by 3rd grade. Do we not need some sort of objective target to approach with respect to the teaching of these children to get them to a grade level where they need to be? I'm hearing of students who are in sixth grade that cannot read that are getting passed on. Now, that's just one, but tell me, do we not need a process to try, a plan to try, and some sort of a target to approach with respect to these 50% or whatever it actually is, and I suspect it's pretty low, actually not being to read on grade level? That ought to be one of the most important things this board is trying to address right now tonight.
I would agree with you. I believe that it is of key importance. I would not agree with you that 50% of our students don't read on grade level.
I said I don't know. It was a wild guess, but nobody in the room seems to know, so I don't have a problem with that.
I would not agree with you that we're producing students in the sixth grade unless they have some severe disability that cannot read. I would not agree with that either. The problem is placing a statistically reliable and valid number on what you wish to attain. Now, I think you'll look back in the history of this administration and the previous administrations where you'll see that gains have been made in student achievement. Multiple plans are in place. We have provided multiple reports to this board about improvements in student reading and in achievement across the board. But what has not been consistent is the test that's administered by the state of South Carolina to determine that. It has not been consistent for more than a 3-year period, Dr. McCrary, no more than a 3-year period in the last 15 years. So while I agree with you, it would seem logical that you could set out and say we need to go from 50% to 55%. It is simply not that simplistic.
So why do we even track it?
Because it's important for us to know how we are doing.
Well, then I would say it would be worthwhile to have a target for us to track toward.
And what should that target be?
Whatever we decide it should be. Right now...
Therein lies the problem.
Right now, the way this thing is written, every member of this board has a target in their brain. You don't know what mine is. Mine might be 25, somebody else's might be 2.5. And I don't think it's a good way to run an organization and say, we just got some wild target out there because it's hard to address it. If it's hard to address it, then we need to find some way to address it. But I do think it is not very good if we are having children who are not able to read on some grade level, and there are half a dozen tests out there that we could use by the time they get to third grade. If they can't read by third grade, what are they going to do by the time they get to 6th, 8th, 10th in the college?
You know what our goal is? Our goal, the administration's goal?
Yeah, 100%.
To move as many, as far, and as fast as we can.
Yeah.
And establishing any arbitrary number is not going to cause us to work any harder, any more diligently, or apply any more effort or resources to it. We're going to get as far as we can possibly get. And unlike perhaps the manufacturing methodology or constructing something, we cannot lay out a finite number and tweak and tune our system to hit that number. What we got to do is apply the best methodology we know, employ the best teachers we can employ and place the best principals in leadership roles, and have them properly lead their faculties to move students as far and as fast as we can possibly move them in every area of student achievement. And it doesn't matter what goal you set forth, that's what we're going to do. If you set 1% or 5% or 25%, we're going to move students as much as we can reasonably and possibly move them.
How do we know if we've succeeded?
We report to you every year how much we've moved. And
But
then
does
you have to judge
Yeah.
whether you believe we've been successful.
Yeah, and so...
I believe we have.
Well, I mean, has there been an increase in the reading level in the K-5?
Yes, sir.
And if so, how much has it been?
I don't have the number in front of me tonight. We'd be glad to send it to you, but we provided that to you in the fall.
I would like to have that as soon as we can, because I don't have any way of determining whether we in fact have had success, whether it has increased. I think it's important for us to say as a board, not just as individuals, but as a board, it's our job and our responsibility to do the very best we can and to try to seek targets that we can work toward achieving in the matter of educating every single one of our students. And it should be 100%, not just whatever the best we can. I mean, whatever the best we can may be good, it may not be. How are we going to do the assessment of whether we have done a good job as a board if we don't know what our target is? Now, I know that there's a target in this document that all of us apparently have agreed to at some point. So is that target meaningless?
Is it meaningless? No, it's not meaningless.
Well, why is it there?
Because we're required to have one, but it's not going to change the fact that we're going to do as much as we can and move people as far as we can. Now, I think perhaps, if I recall correctly, you came on the board after we spent a 4 or 5 hour session on test scores. I believe that's correct. So you would have not been present when we went through in great detail every test score at every grade level, how much they had improved or if they had not improved. We do that annually, spend several hours going over. You have all the data by individual school, by grade level, and by achievement area. We track all that. We constantly track that.
So is that not a good thing for us to kind of track and put in our targets? That's the only thing I'm saying. I don't think it makes a whole lot of sense to say, when I tell my son, I don't want you to run out in the street, and he says, well, I'm going to do the best I can, don't worry about the rest of it. It doesn't work that way with my son. Even though he's about 36 years old, he still doesn't do what he's supposed to do. And I think it's important for us, if we're going to actually begin to move the needle in the way we should be establishing for ourselves targets that we can pursue.
I can assure you, Mr. Chamley, I'm going to do what I'm supposed to do. I can assure you of that.
I guess the only thing I'd say is you really don't know, because you don't know what's in my mind as to what you should be doing.
No, sir, but I'm going to do every day the very best that I can do to ensure that our students achieve at the level they should achieve.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Meek? Did you? Okay.
Thank you.
Since we're debating this amendment, what are students reading in K-5? Who can tell me what students are reading in K-5?
I'm going to let either Ms. Byrd or Ms. Lewis speak to that, since Mr. McCoy
Sorry, ladies.
is not here tonight. And I believe Dr. McDavid's out there, so she could speak to that as well. I'm sorry, Dr. McDavid, I didn't say that. One of you volunteered.
Huh? Well, it's in the amendment.
I guess one clarification I had, when I see it up there, it says K through 5. So as it is written, it appears to be kindergarten through 5th grade students. Am I correct? Okay. So a couple of times we've said kindergarten, but that appears to be kindergarten through 5th grade.
I'm sorry, I misunderstood also. You know, I guess by not being in committee, I didn't get that chance to clarify that, but I thought it was K-5.
I thought your question was, what are we teaching as far as reading in K-5, meaning kindergarten?
Well, that's what the amendments here reads, percentage of K-5 students.
Should be K-5. It's a little difficult to read up there. So K through 5, kindergarten through 5th.
So the motion is kindergarten through 5th grade?
Yes, sir. All elementary grades.
Oh, that puts a whole list of other questions to come into play. But I'd still be interested in what they're reading in kindergarten, since you're up here. And I know you're dying to answer.
Well, of course, we differentiate for where students are when they come to us. Some students are already reading, so if that's the case, we're going to continue to move them forward. But in general, kindergarten focuses on identifying letters and letter sounds and moving towards reading of words as they are ready and developmentally appropriate for them.
And if you will recall from Mr. McCoy's presentation on the balanced literacy framework, we began with that phonemic awareness, letter sounds, putting the letters together to make words, and then students progress into reading and making meaning of those words. So that is a progression that is not only based on students' ability in teaching, but it's based on developmental levels, which is why in K1 and 2, we allow for a varying degree of developmental readiness to read.
So when we're saying on grade level, are they tested in kindergarten?
We have assessments on FastBridge that we use in grades K1 and 2, And the most recent Fast Bridge data has been collected, and we're disaggregating that along with Dr. Andrews' office. But we look at kindergarten level students' letter recognition and sound recognition. That's what they begin with, and then they go on to first grade, and we're looking at their ability to speak high-frequency words and putting those words together in first and second grade to develop an understanding of what they're reading.
Is that considered reading?
Reading, yes. If you've ever watched a little child with the book turning
Oh, I
pages,
have.
when your grandbaby is opening a book and making meaning of the pictures and enjoying it and touching, that is reading, when they're looking at it and gaining enjoyment from it. But for a 2-year-old to a 5-year-old to a 6-year-old, there's a developmental level that goes along with that, and we try to instill the love of reading with fluency.
Okay.
Thank you.
I just never considered that reading. That's what I was just wondering, what kind of books that the average kindergarten, and I misread this. I didn't understand it was K through 5. As I said, if it had went through committee, I would have understood it, I'm sure. So thank you, ladies.
That it?
I guess, I'm just flabbergasted and it's really hard to be against the amendment, the wording of it, but it's very difficult to support the process. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Ms. Goodwin-Caldwell?
Well, whenever I attended the committee meeting, we made suggestions and everything, and then it went back to saying, well, we're just going to go back to the first document that we provided anyway, regardless of what other people said. So, like I said before, we all want to be heard, and we all want what's best for all of the students in this district, and I know that the superintendent does. And we said, if we have a growth model, whether we put 10%, 20%, or whatever in there, as long as we see growth in there, then we can't gig him on what he didn't make up to that amount. But I wanted to ask let me see that. We do have one in here that has the same language, and annually increase the percentage of graduates, which is the same language as one of these amendments that she has, annually increase the percentage of K-5 students reading. So, it's basically about the same. It's just making sure that this about the K-5 students reading on grade level is included. And also, the annually increase the targeted literacy programs in secondary schools in accordance with the strategic ed plan is basically saying the same thing of some of the stuff that's already in this document. So if we all were heard, I don't think we would be having this conversation right now about what's in it. So that's all I wanted to say, and I'm out.
Thank you. Anyone else? Linda?
Well, this has certainly been a discussion. There is a process in place, and I also served on that committee. And we took everything into consideration. We split up all of these different objectives. We tried to come up with what was fair. We listened. And I know Dr. Ball O'Connor has brought up some good points. I know I don't know what's in your brain, Roy. I don't know what you're thinking. And I don't think any of us know what anybody is thinking, other than our most important goal is serving and making sure our students get the best education they can. They so deserve. And I don't think the superintendent is going to look at an objective and say, all I need is 1% so that I have accomplished this objective. I think our superintendent strives for greatness because good is not good enough. It's all about greatness. We all on this board bring something different to the table. We all have a passion for certain things, and our superintendent must have a passion for lots of things. So when it comes down to how we did the evaluation, we did it to the best of our ability. If there's something that you think needs to be added, I mean, if you look at that 144 pages, we can add every initiative in there, and then you're going to have to just make sure when you give us your report, it's 500 pages, and we better all read it so that we can evaluate you properly. Because you've implemented every test, everything that Jason McQuarrie is going to come up with as far as statistics, and every report in the world, and every grade level, and everything. Because you don't know what we're all thinking. So I think we have to use a little common sense. We have to, it makes you feel like you serve on a committee, and then you get to this point, and what was the reason of coming here all those afternoons for hours and doing all the research on our homework that we were given to come back with objectives, and then to go on for months, and then come here and just go, well, we want this or we want that. I don't know what the answer is. I really don't. But I'm ready to call the question.
I have a motion to call for the question on this topic. Is there a second?
Second.
I have a motion properly made and seconded to call the question. It's not debatable. All those in favor of calling the question say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? No. The chair is of the opinion the majority is in favor of calling the question.
Or two-thirds, Mr. Chairman.
Two-thirds? Okay, then let's have a show of hands. All those in favor of calling the question, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I count 7, Doug, is that right? Okay. All those opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, help me with my numerators and denominators.
I think you would need 8.
You got to have 8, okay.
Yeah.
So the motion to call for the question fails. Mr. Meek.
No, it wasn't called a question, but Mr. Chairman, could you check with the administration to see over the last 5 years, from kindergarten through 5th grade, how many has not increased in the grade level?
Are you asking by grade level or totality?
Well, totality, I
So
guess.
how many
Kindergarten through
students
5th grade.
Dr. Royster?
I don't know if we're prepared to answer that. Dr. McCreary? Did you hear the question? Well, good answer.
Mr. Meek.
In general terms, I believe you said over a 5-year period, Mr.
Yes,
Meek.
sir.
In general terms, our student achievement has increased in K-5 over a 5-year period. I don't have the number right in front of me, but in general terms, that would be true. Now, that would have been on 2 different tests over that 5-year period, at least 2, 3 different tests. So we've administered 3 different tests. And again, and sometimes we forget about this year's 5th grade is not last year's 5th grade. It's a totally different and unique group of individuals, which further...
Dr. Royster, could you repeat what you said? I'd love for Mr. Roy to hear it.
Yes, sir. One of the challenges is, and I'll go back to, Dr. McCreary reminded me, it had been 3 different tests over a 5-year period. I think probably even more importantly, if you look at one 5th grade compared to the one before it and the one behind it, it is 3 uniquely different groups of students. Now, we look at that in the bigger picture and we like to say, well, when they went through, we've kind of had a consistent amount of improvement over different tests with different populations. But that's one reason it is extremely difficult to say that these test scores are reliable and valid, because they're different groups of students. And to Dr. McCreary's point, there are 3 different tests in that period of time. That's why it is unlike constructing something, engineering something, or manufacturing something. We have control over what we do with those students, but we have no control over the raw material with which we work. And those are the students that come to us. Some more capable, some perhaps less capable, some with greater challenges, some with fewer challenges.
So over the 3 tests, over the 5-year period that we're talking about, if we had kept the first test probably only given 1 year, if we'd kept the first test, then we would have had a better picture on whether these students, kindergarten through 5th grade, had increased percentages or decreased in percentages.
Yes, sir. A little better picture.
A little better picture.
Still realizing that those would be, obviously over 5 years, 5 different groups of 5th graders, or 4th graders, or 3rd graders.
The current test we have that we're using to test these students have been in place for how long?
This is year 3, Jason?
Yeah, is there talk in the education world of the state of changing this test?
No, I'm not aware of any on the horizon, so I think we're good for at least 1 more year. Of course, they have dropped some tests, so obviously those won't be available for comparison purposes. Science and social studies.
So remind me again, Mr. Chairman, which test that we are applying this item on? Which test is it?
Well, Mr. Meek, I'll have to ask the administration to answer that because I have no clue.
Okay.
Dr. Royster?
Is this,
Well, not, Crystal, this is not he we're asking, Roger's got the floor.
I understand, but I took that away from him.
Apparently broke part of my microphone. Ask that again, Mr. Meek, in a different way, because I'm not sure I'm thinking the question is what you asked.
It was hard enough to ask it that way. Ask it a different way. I'm saying that with the current testing,
yes, sir,
and your evaluation, which test will we be applying to this evaluation to evaluate you on?
In anything that would relate to elementary, it would be the state's testing program, which would be grades 3 through, actually through the 8th grade, so elementary and middle school. So I'll get them confused. SC Ready is the new one. Not new now. SC Pass was its predecessor. So SC Ready.
And that's for what grades?
3 through 8.
Okay, so that'd take you through 5th grade then. So 3 through 5th.
Yes, sir. The first time we do a standardized test is at the completion of the 3rd grade.
So
and we do some internal and some benchmarking testing with. We do KRA, which is required by the state with kindergartners. Then we do some benchmark testing 1st and 2nd grade. And through the phonics and Pinnell reading, they constantly are testing and retesting to move them reading levels.
So which test would we be evaluating you on from kindergarten, 1st grade, and 2nd grade?
The one that I would, absent some additional guidance, what I would provide to you would be starting with the 3rd grade test, because that's a state standardized testing system.
So why do we include kindergarten in this motion?
what we normally, when we address K through 5, and we even talk about test scores, elementary test scores, we'll often refer to it as K through 5, but we're actually going to only look at the standardized testing, which begins in the 3rd grade. So we provide you the KRA, but it really talks about readiness as opposed to what we do once they get here.
So we actually would be evaluating you on if the percentage increased in 3rd, 4th, and 5th grades.
Yes, sir, as it would reflect what they would have learned in the 1st and the 2nd grade. Now, if you want additional data in that, we can provide some of the other stuff we use internally, but it is not as, it's more appropriate for teaching purposes, less appropriate for comparison purposes between groups.
Seems to me like I remember somewhere back in the near future, near past, that the state passed some type of law about having to read on level by grade 3rd grade.
Reading on grade level by grade 3. And then there are, obviously a number of exceptions to that, but general terms, yes, sir.
So we're going to evaluate you on a law that's already passed saying that they have to read on grade level. So now if all you have to do is increase that by 1 to meet the goal of this amendment.
I don't believe moving it by 1 student would satisfy any particular individual board member's mind, but perhaps it would. It wouldn't satisfy mine.
But if you went by the letter of the amendment, that was all that would be necessary.
They're not established percentages, going back to the previous discussion about the difficulty in establishing those. Now, we would say to you that probably something less than a 1% gain is not statistically significant. So while we might have had a gain, I wouldn't call that statistically significant.
But if it come down to your job performance, I would include it in as an increase.
Well, sure.
Okay.
But I would also,
just to be clear.
Yes, sir. But I would also have to be honest with you and say that's not statistically significant.
I understand that. Okay, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make an amendment to this motion.
Sure.
To substitute where it says K through 5 to read 3 through 5.
Okay, I have a motion to amend by deletion and addition to the motion that's on the floor. Is there a second? No. You got a motion to amend. Is there a second? Okay, then, Mr. Meek, with all due respect, it dies for the lack of a second.
Isn't that awful? Thank you.
You're welcome. Anyone else? Mrs. Levinas Wells?
Mr. Superintendent, there's specific targets.
Don't talk to me.
Roger, cut the mic off.
There's specific targets in the ed plan, and more to come with baseline set this spring, correct?
Yes, there's specific targets in the ed plan. We'd provide you information on where we are, actually in the fall, but there would be the results of the spring testing.
So the ed plan could be used as a reference document for the evaluation.
Yes, ma'am. That's my belief that it is I don't want to speak for the committee, but I believe it was the design intent of the committee that the items contained in the ed plan would be guidance to board members that they might wholly adopt, partially adopt, or wholly disregard.
Correct.
In assessing each of those 5 areas. I think the requirement, in my mind, the requirement there is that you assess each of the 5 areas, but you choose how much or how little weight to give any of the things specifically listed under them.
Yes, sir. Also, implementation of action items don't guarantee outcomes. Is that correct?
We would hope that they would, but they do not.
And
sometimes we may implement them, find that they don't, and then we discard them.
yes, sir. And probably reasons because we're dealing with little human beings, human children. And the way, and when we're told why aren't all children reading by a certain level. By third grade, they should all be reading at third grade level. Is it true that we get children all through the year in all grade levels who may not even speak English, who may have things going on in their lives that no one even understands? Is that true?
From, not only are those things true, but from a human growth and development perspective, it is highly unlikely that everybody's going to read on the third grade level when they're in the third grade. That ability is, to a degree, like some other abilities, artistic ability, athletic ability, academic ability is not equally proportioned. And despite the legislature's efforts to legislate such, there will not be a time when every third grade student reads on the third grade level. Now, we want them as close to that as they can be if they're below that. But, you know, there's some in the third grade that are reading on the seventh grade level.
Exactly. So all children mature at different levels.
Mm-hmm.
If children are falling behind, we have programs in place to assist these young people during the summer. We have summer programs for them. Is that correct?
Specifically for reading, yes.
Yes. I think we took a lot of this in consideration when we were working on this. I'm just, right now, I'm a little exhausted. I'm trying to understand why we're getting so into the weeds on every little thing when we have utilized this tool. We've tried to implement everything possible that would utilize everything in place that the district's using for your evaluation. And we keep adding and adding. So I'm just trying to get a better understanding and maybe open up some eyes as to why we did what we have done. Thank you.
Okay, I've got Mr. Lewis and Mr. Shamley. Mr. Lewis.
So I think that there's a meaningful discussion happening here that probably should happen at a different time of day. And I appreciate the work that the committee did, and I appreciate the work that my colleagues have done to try to make it more palatable. It would be my recommendation that the board consider postponing this item to the August CAL. Now, before I make the motion, it's going to require 4 motions because we're going to need to postpone each of the items individually and then postpone the actual original item to the August CAL. So I want to ask the question to Doug. Am I correct in understanding?
What the hell was that?
Doug. Am I correct? I would need to make a motion to postpone each of these individuals.
I need to step to the restroom right quick. Would you hurry up?
I believe because they're bifurcated.
That's right.
That is correct.
Yeah.
So
Trifurcated.
So in the interest of time, and because we have a large number of items that still demand our attention tonight,
Yes, we do.
including several budgetary items that can't wait until August, I'm going to make the motion that we postpone until the August CAL the amended indicator number 1.
I have a motion properly made. Is there a second?
Second.
Can we debate? I'm a little foggy.
So we
Motion to refer to committee, you can.
not refer
Or refer to CAL.
to the CAL, yes.
To answer my question, I'm in the
Yes.
center seat right
Yes.
now.
Yes.
Yes, we can debate.
Debate.
Okay. Is there any discussion?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
And since we're adding this all together, let me just add that I'm still a little bit perplexed why we don't have some of these answers at our fingertip. So not having looked through every score in every part of this thing, I just want to point out on page 14.
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah,
there-
go ahead.
There's a motion to postpone this item.
Yes, you got to
Yeah.
talk to the top. The motion is to postpone this to the August
Here's
calendar.
why I don't want to postpone it, what I'm
Okay.
trying to get an answer.
Go ahead.
Because the question we had a while ago was, we don't know, right? We don't know what these scores are. So I just want to ask, let me just go to one.
No, sir, let me clarify that answer. I didn't say we don't know. I said we don't have that information in here tonight.
Well,
We didn't know that specific test score questions would arise from this discussion.
Okay. We all have this here, and I don't know if this is correct, but it's what's in front of me, and I'm just going to refer just to one, grades 4, 6 through 8. 2011, GCS compared to the state, the percent meeting the standard compared to the state was 75.
Okay.
2018, it was 49. That's what's telling me we need to do something different. And maybe it's not what we're discussing tonight, but that's why I still am interested in getting to the bottom of this. I got all night.
I believe the 18 and 17 and 16 tests were consistent. The 15 was a different test.
But still, compared to the entire state, we were way below
Mr.
percentage-wise.
Shamley, with all respect, we don't have access to the material you have in front of you at this moment.
But that's,
So
we should.
I'm gonna,
That's- yeah.
okay, you've spoken your piece. The topic on the floor is whether we send this to committee, and it's my understanding, Mr. Lewis, so we can have, to the committee of the whole, the Cal meeting in August, so we can have a more deeper dive and have access to the material we think we need at the time. Is that correct on my part?
Yes, that's
Okay.
correct.
Any other questions or comments related to the motion on the floor? Ms. Wells?
So if we postpone this motion, and we don't postpone, if you
You
don't,
got to postpone all four of them for it to work.
so if I get back to the main motion and I don't want to postpone it, is that possible?
It's, from a parliamentary standpoint, yes, it is possible.
So if my desire is to not postpone and to just vote something down, I don't have to vote for a postponement for the main motion?
That's my understanding, that's correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay, Dr. O'Connor, to the motion.
Yes. I would like to ask Mr. Lewis consideration on allowing, because I really don't believe there's anything more to discuss. We came close to calling the question. I never do, because I don't think it's courteous to cut anybody off from debate. But I think we have had a good amount of discussion, and it's really, hey, you want the reading indicators in or you don't. And if we could go ahead and vote on that, on these amendments,
Dr.
and
O'Connor,
then consider whether to postpone the entire thing. It just feels like we're kind of right toward the end of a discussion on that, but maybe I'm wrong, but that's.
Motion on the floor stated and seconded, so that's what we're discussing. Thank you for your point, but any other questions? Okay, hearing none,
Excuse me, is this for the whole thing then?
no, ma'am, we're going to have to take it. Since we split your amendment into three separate questions, we're going to have to vote on each of those three questions individually. Then it rolls back to the original committee recommendation, and we'll have to vote on that one as presented tonight.
Okay.
So you got to, if you want to send this back to the committee of the whole in August, you're going to have to vote yes 4 times in a row.
Right.
That simple? Okay. Is that correct? Am I right?
Correct.
Okay. So, yes, ma'am.
So the August cow is not on Google Docs. Are we talking about August 13th? Just so everybody knows.
Second Tuesday.
Can you turn the microphones down there? Yes, the 13th. Mr. Meek.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I heard several speak earlier that they were willing to stay here and debate this motion, so I can't support to postpone it. I think we ought to stay here and debate it as others do and get through with it, whatever we need to do.
Any other comments? Well, the chair would like to offer one point of personal information. I don't care if we voted up or down. I don't care if we go backward or forward. I've been up since 4 o'clock. I have been away from my home for 2 weeks, excuse me. And at 10:30, my keister's gone. And Linda can take over. We're beating the hell out of this for no reason. Now, enough is enough, guys. Now, you've got a motion on the floor to postpone. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
No.
Motion fails. We're back to the original motion. Any other discussion on the motion? I got a motion to call for the question. Is there a second? Okay, I got a motion and a second to call for the question on the original motion, which is the first bullet of the 3 that were provided. Not debatable. All those in favor of calling the question, please say aye. Aye. All opposed?
No.
We do not call for the question. We're back to the debate. Any other questions or comments related to the bulleted item number 1 as presented earlier? Hearing none. All those in favor of the motion, as presented, please vote accordingly. Sherry, would you please do the roll call?
Mrs. Bush? Yes. Mr. Chamley?
Yes.
Mrs. Grayson?
No.
Mrs. Louise Wells? Mr. Lewis?
No.
Mr. Meek?
No.
Mrs. Morrison Fair?
Yes.
Dr. O'Connor?
Yes.
Mr. Sadett?
Yes.
Mrs. Wells?
Yes.
Mr. Sailors?
No.
Six yes, 5 no.
Okay. Now we move to the next bulleted item. We have a motion on the floor to approve this bulleted item as presented as one of the 3 motions to amend. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion as stated, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
No.
No. Motion passes. The next item of business in order is the 3rd amendment, which is the 3rd bulleted item as split from the motion to amend. Any questions? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion as stated, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
No.
Motion passes. We're now back to the original motion coming from the committee, which is item 6.12 as amended. Any
11.
discussion on that? Mr. Lewis?
11. 6.11.
611, I'm sorry. Thank you.
Wait a minute.
Not
611, I'm sorry.
So on the main-
We're back to the item 611, which is the report from the committee, which is to approve the instrument as presented. It has been amended, and now the motion as amended is up for discussion. Any questions? Mrs. Wells?
So, Mr. Lewis pointed out something that's troubling to me. As I understood, the goal of this change was to move to an evaluation instrument that would allow more clearly to demonstrate what we accomplish, what we're accomplishing in the district, and have us clearly set those expectations for the superintendent through the strategic ed plan. I've heard a lot of commentary about how we can't do that, and I guess that's the commentary that went on during the committee, is that all these reasons why you can't do that. Then I read that this document says indicators may serve as a guide to the evaluator in assessing each of the 6 goals. Individual indicators are not rated and may or may not be used as the guide for the evaluation. So what I did not understand when I looked at this, I thought it was a formatting issue, but I believed we were going to rate on each indicator, that each indicator would have had a highly effective, ineffective, or needs improvement. What I heard tonight is that is not the intent, and that I am going to look at Goal 1, student success, and read, the superintendent delivers high-quality curriculum, instruction, interventions that meet the needs of each student, and I'm just going to decide if he's highly effective, effective, or needs improvement based on whatever's in the report. I said at the Cal that I don't have a problem with the holding the superintendent to numbers, because every one of the teachers in this district and every one of the principals in every building we have are held to goals. They all have numeric goals they need to meet. They have gains they need to meet, and we have had people move on because they couldn't meet those goals. So I don't have a problem with having those specific goals, and was going to be very supportive of having that sort of instrument. This instrument is not that. So when I look at this with that recognition, and I compare it to what we have, which Ms. Grayson and I worked together on several years ago, and developed around some best practices and some standards, I think this is not a good substitute for what we have. What we had were performance-driven indicators for the superintendent. And while it might have been long, it was something that he was able to demonstrate and lay out in his report to us that he had met those metrics. I don't see this here. This is much more fuzzy and squishy. And again, we've had all this conversation about why you can't look at a number. Now, you know, that's a whole different conversation to have about what the board priorities are and what the number needs to be. And maybe that's a follow-on conversation. But if we can't use that to put into the superintendent's evaluation instrument, I don't see any reason to change to this instrument. So I am not going to be supporting the use and the adoption of this instrument. I appreciate what the committee tried to do, but in hindsight, maybe we were trying to do something that we shouldn't have been trying to do. So I'm going to vote against this change. Thank you.
Mrs. Grayson?
I agree with Ms. Wells. I mean, what this whole process has shown me over 6 months is that there is no way that 12 people are going to agree on what should go in this document, and that keeping what we have is probably not a bad idea. But I don't think that sending it back to the committee is going to do any good. I don't think that talking about it in a cow for 3 days is going to do any good, because ultimately what is going to happen is that board members are going to evaluate the way they want to evaluate. And whatever goes in the comment section could be 144 pages or it could be 2 words. And that's not going to change no matter what the instrument is. So, you know, Ms. Wells and I worked together. We had something that works. I have no problem. But what tonight has shown me and the last 6 months have shown me is that we are not going to come to a consensus on changing the document, because there is no way we're going to get 12 people to agree on what anything other than the 6 goals.
Okay, I had Mr. Meek and then Mr. Lewis.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that we postpone this item indefinitely.
Second.
I have a motion properly made and seconded to postpone this item indefinitely. Mr. Lewis, I'm sure you'd like to speak to it, and then Dr. O'Connor.
I would. I just heard our chair of the committee say that she would recommend doing the same thing. And so I agree with the committee's chair that if we can't produce a product in this room and we're not willing to wait until August to do it, then why don't we just keep what we have?
Dr. O'Connor?
I just was trying to understand the effect of the motion.
It would just simply take tonight's action item and postpone it indefinitely. Doug, we can bring it back when?
It would just take it either by board policy through the action of a committee, or by a board member could bring it back from the table. So unless you postpone it by a certain time period, it can be brought up back any time.
So we could postpone it tonight, and it could, in fact, come back at the August Cal meeting.
It could.
But that would be at the request of a board member or members.
That's right.
Okay, Dr. O'Connor, that answer your question?
Yes. So help me understand that. If we just voted and we voted it down, how would that effect be different than postponing?
I can't answer that question other than the fact that right now I can tell you how I'd vote. I can't say anything for the rest of you. As far as I'm concerned, put the damn thing back on postponement, and let's go through this at another time when we're fresh and a heck of a lot more patient than we are with each other. Roy?
Just a question, though. When you say postpone it indefinitely, you're not saying table.
I didn't say table.
That's what I'm saying. I just what I was asking. I want to make sure that
But
we're.
you can't ask me that.
That's why I clarified it. Postpone
So
it.
that's, I just want to make sure we're not talking about tabling it. We're just talking about postponing it indefinitely.
That's correct.
Sounds good.
Any other questions on the motion to postpone? Mrs. Wells and Mr. Meek.
I would like to understand from the proposer how this would be better than just voting it down.
Mr. Lewis, would you?
I didn't make the motion.
Oh, I mean, Mr. Meek, I'm sorry, forgive me. You two are dressed in blue, you're down there at the end together, you know.
Your
what-
question is, Mr. Chairman?
She wants to know, would you please repeat your question?
Yes, what is the
What's the
value
difference
of
between-
postponing indefinitely? What is the intent to postpone it indefinitely and having it hang out there versus just voting it down?
Mr. Meek?
If you vote it down completely, it's gone. Postpone indefinitely means that if hopefully a majority of the board wants to bring it back and have a civil discussion and we got the time to do it, then we would do it. If not, it just goes away. We use the same document as we had.
Did that answer your question?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Mr. Meek? Or who had their hand up down there? I thought it was Mr. Meek. Okay, we're done? Okay, the motion on the floor then is to postpone this item indefinitely. All those in favor of the motion as stated, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? No. Show of hands, all those in favor of postponing indefinitely, please raise your hand. Have 5. All those opposed? What, 6? Wait a minute. Doug, okay, all those in favor of postponing, please vote. Doug, count.
5.
Okay. All those against the motion to postpone? 6. Okay. Motion fails. Okay, so now we're back to the motion on the floor as amended. Any additional discussion? Mr. Meek?
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion to lay it on the table.
We have a motion to take the item and lay it on the table. Second. Have a motion and a second. Debatable?
No.
That's what I thought. All those in favor of the motion to table this item, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? No. Motion passes. We'll now move on to is item 6.11 relevant?
No.
Okay.
And as chair, I'd move to withdraw that because that was contingent on
Not
passing.
6.11, 6.12, I'm sorry.
That was contingent motion.
Okay, so 6.12 is no longer relevant. Doug, how do we deal with that?
I believe by the action on 611, it goes away.
Is there any objection to handling 6.12 in such a manner? Okay, we'll move now to item 6.13, fiscal year 2020 general obligation bond resolution. There is a motion from the administration. Is there a maker?
Mr. Sailors.
Ms. Wells.
I move to approve the resolution for the fiscal year 20 general obligation bonds.
Have a motion made, and is there a second?
Second.
Any questions? Hearing none. All those in favor of the motion stated, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Next item of business in order is 6.14, fiscal year 2020 debt service budget. There is a recommended motion from the administration. Is there a maker?
Mr. Sailors.
Ms. Wells.
I move to approve the fiscal year 20 debt service budget.
Have a motion made. Is there a second? Second. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion as stated, please say aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Next item of business is 6.15, fiscal year 2020 best debt service budget. A recommended motion from the administration is listed. Is there a maker?
Mr. Sailors, I'll just keep going.
Go right ahead.
To approve the fiscal year 20 best debt service budget.
We have a motion. Is there a second? Second. Motion properly made and seconded. Any discussion? Mr. Meek.
Could Mr. Knotts explain this in a little more detail? What just passed and going on? To what year does this cover, Mr. Knotts?
This covers fiscal year FY20, which begins July 1st, 2019 through June 30th, 2020.
And we would still be on schedule to pay the total debt of 2029?
December 2028.
28, almost 29. Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Any other questions? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion as stated, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Next item of business and order is 6.16 fiscal year 2020 building fund budget. There's a recommended motion. Is there a maker?
Mr. Sailors,
Ms. Wells?
I move to approve the fiscal year 20 building fund budget.
Have a motion made. Is there a second? Have a motion made and seconded. Any discussion? Mr. Meek?
What buildings does this cover?
What buildings?
Yes, sir.
I can give you a list of some of the major projects this covers.
Okay. Does that include Fountain Inn High School?
Yes, sir.
And the when will that? The bid is out on that now. Is that right, or is it back in?
Yes, sir. You may not have had the opportunity to see it. I sent something out today. The bids came back in last week, and the bids for Fountain Inn were within the budget.
And the budget is?
Construction budget was just under 69, Terry?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Now, we're still within the 16-day protest period, but we do not anticipate a protest.
Okay, and is the process still that we would only, when we start the school up, we would only start the 9th grade?
Yes, sir. That's our current occupation plan, is that we would move forward and roll it up a grade level at a time. We believe that there's programmatic benefit, and it also helps to minimize impact to the operating budget as well.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Lewis?
Just a couple of questions. Are we approving the capital improvement program budget as well, or just the?
Yes, sir. The capital projects that were laid out to you in the March long-range facility capital improvement plan, the ones that would occur or begin during this year are funded through this. Yes, sir.
Could you just give me an update on what, when it says athletic facility needs for that fiscal year 20, it's $1.3 million, what that's for?
Mr. Mills?
I'm sorry, could you restate your question?
Or Mr. Knotts may be more prepared to answer that.
I'd like to restate it also.
Go ahead, Mr. Knotts.
The 3A athletic facility needs, there's $1.3 million for FY20. What's that for?
Jeff, I got it. Specifically, that it would address another weight room at a high school.
Which weight room at which high school?
We're working toward Southside High School's next in line.
So $1.3 million buys us one weight room?
Yes, sir.
So currently, we're still operating on the plan to do one weight room a year?
Yes, sir. However, it is our intent, after the bonds are sold in the late summer, when we have that information back as to the amount the sale requires and what it generates, the specific, as you know, that's somewhat of an estimate at this point. As we have that information, and as we have access to some revenue in excess of expense when we close out last fiscal year, in addition to the amount that we have from the preceding fiscal year, is our intent to bring back to you some projects or some expenditures, non-recurring, for those funds. And one of those things would be to accelerate the construction of the weight rooms to advance them more quickly than the 10-year rollout, which basically was based on our ability to fund them.
Okay, thank you.
And there would also be a number of security enhancements included within that.
Anybody else? You have a motion properly made and duly seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Next item of business in order is item 6.17, fiscal year 2020 Food and Nutrition Services budget. There is a recommended motion. Is there a maker?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
motion to approve the fiscal year 20 food and nutrition services budget.
I second.
We have a motion properly made and seconded. Any questions? Mr. Lewis?
Just a couple of questions. One, could we get an update on the summer food program and how that is going? Are we seeing that our numbers this year are higher or lower than last year? I know we're in the middle of the summer, but
Yeah, so it's still a little early, but right now it appears we're on track for last year.
so when we look at FY19's budget, FY20's budget, where do we see that increase in revenue coming from? Is it coming from this reimbursable rate that we're getting from USDA? Is it coming from more meals being sold? Where do we see that increase?
Part of that increase is from the projected increase in the USDA reimbursement and also projected increase in the amount of students we're going to have next year.
Okay, so part of it is a reimbursement increase and part of it is a user
Correct.
increase. Okay. The other question I have is we talk sometimes about unpaid balances in food, and I know that the board has a policy that we've supported that students' food would not be withheld from students who have a negative balance on their food card. Is that still correct?
Can you repeat that?
That we're not withholding food from students because of their inability to pay or because they have a negative balance on their.
I don't believe the board policy reads exactly like
Okay.
that. We do provide alternative meals to students who have balances in excess of $20 in
Okay.
elementary and middle schools. We do not take away food from any child once they have it in their hand, regardless of their balance.
Okay. So I guess then the only other question I have is I know part of the strategic plan was to really take a look at particularly the fans department, work on retention, and part of that was a compensation study to make sure that we're appropriately compensating our staff. I see the increase here that employee compensation increase is the one that the board approved for all staff.
That's correct.
That's correct.
Do we feel like that we are? It seems like the need to specifically target fan staff with an increase is kind of getting absorbed into giving everybody a raise. When I thought part of the reason we devoted time in the ed plan to fans was because we might have to actually do more in order to be competitive in the food service industry. So is it y'all's opinion that the changes that we're making this year allow us to continue to remain competitive when we're recruiting food service staff, or does this board need to start looking at additional increases specifically within the fans department to help keep those wages competitive?
I think one of the keys to the answer to that was actually within your question, and that was placed in there because we believe that might be a need that we would have to address. This has been a most unusual year in a lot of respects, particularly with the amount of state revenue we got. We would ordinarily not, I don't think, been able to have provided the level of increase, not just to teachers, but to non-teachers as well. The greater and gauge that we constantly monitor is the rate at which Mr. Urban has difficulty in filling his positions. And at this point, we are not experiencing any unusual amount of difficulty in filling those, certainly not in comparison with our other similarly salaried employees, which would be custodial employees and bus drivers. And that's not just an anecdotal experience, but the ease or difficulty with which Mr. Urban has in staffing lunchrooms. We may not be. We have some benefits that other food service workers don't get in the private sector. The biggest thing is the hours that we operate. It's one of the biggest ones. And then the benefits package we have, insurance is attractive to them. And I think we also attract a significant number of people who like the idea that they have the same schedule as their children. Mr. Urban may want to add to that.
No, I think that's accurate. Out of 750 employees, We would say about 500 of them, so the core employees that are with us that remain with us, and usually around 250 employees over the course of a couple of years will come and go based on their need for full-time employment or a 12-month employment. But our turnover rate is in the low 30s right now, as compared to the restaurant industry. It's about 76%. So we believe that at this point that our salaries are competitive and consistent with other food service programs in the state.
Okay. I guess the other observation I would make is that I really appreciate the intentionality in keeping the food price to $2.50 a meal. I know this is the second consecutive year that we've been able to keep those prices the same, even though we've increased our food costs. And I just think that's really incredible, and I think it shows a real commitment to families who depend on that number to stay as affordable as possible. So thank you for that. The last question I have is about the barbecue team and what steps the board needs to do to be invited to future barbecue team displays of.
That depends on what you're willing to cut loose.
Yeah. I think it's kind of dependent on how this vote goes in a minute first,
All right.
and then
Fair enough.
then we can talk about
Perhaps we
what
should call
qualifies
the
you for the barbecue team.
Thank you.
I think we created a monster, Joe. Okay, anything else? Mr. Meek.
Just a question, do we still have the truck and the SIP preparing meals?
The food truck? Yes, sir.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
How many locations this summer?
The food truck, I think, right now is servicing 7 locations every day.
One truck?
One truck, yes.
We actually have a second one that has been donated as a result of the, don't we get this wrong, a DLI group that Ms. Hogan was a part of. We just don't yet have it. They've committed it. They have the truck. They've wrapped it.
We actually have that truck.
There was a little error in the wrapping.
We have possession of it.
Do we have it now?
We are in possession. We're waiting for.
And it's correct, right?
No, we had to send it back again. They don't
So
like
we
to smell
don't actually
vegetable
have
correctly.
it.
Yeah.
Hopefully in the next week or two it'll be in service.
It's pending DHEC approval right now. As soon as it gets permitted and it gets licensed and registered, we'll be good to go. So hopefully that'll be serving about another 8 locations every day.
Great, thank you.
And also that depends on the wrapping being grammatically correct.
Now, we fixed
Spell-
those,
spell-
we
proper
fixed
spelling.
vegetable already.
Mr. Chairman, my vote's yes, let's go ahead.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor. Any other discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion as stated, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, motion carries. Next item of business in order is item 6.18, fiscal year 2020 special revenue budgets. There's a recommended motion. Is there a maker?
Mr. Chairman, recommended motion that we take FY 20 special revenue budget.
I have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Mrs. Wells.
Yeah, so a question on the, gosh, I'm getting bleary-eyed. The student device replacement fund projected budget is twice what it was this year, so we're looking at $950,000, and that's from fees collected. So have we raised our fees that we're charging, or is it just that we have more devices?
We have
Line
not
item 42?
increased the fee. I think it would be associated with the additional rollout of devices.
Yes, that's,
Okay.
Is that correct, Jill?
yes, it is.
Okay, and you're tracking, so that account you take in, and then everything that's needed for replacement and repair comes out of, we have a service or something, is that right? Insurance or?
We have insurance, and Bill Brown may be able to speak more about that.
We want everybody in the audience to have a chance to come up to the table.
I needed the exercise. Yes, we have multiple levels of warranties on the devices. We have a manufacturer warranty for any manufacturer defects, and then we have an accidental warranty for any accidental type issues.
Okay, so this special revenue fund is specifically the fee that we're charging students, though, right?
That is correct.
And then what is paid
From this fund,
from this fund?
as a student if we need repairs, once it's out of warranty, we're helping this. We may also use it to help buy new devices in the schools if this balance gets too large. So it gives us flexibility to address items as they may come out that we did not anticipate.
Okay. So we're still kind of working on what this is going to look like in terms of how much we need, really, I guess is what I kind of hear you saying. Since we're just rolling out the devices, we're going to charge this fee. We don't really know how much money it's going to take to do this work, but we'll have this fund available to sit here and...
Our experience so far would indicate that we may be able to roll that back, but we don't want to do that until we've got the full rollout.
Okay.
Our loss experience has not been what one might have thought it would be.
That's encouraging. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Lewis and Mr. Meek.
So just a couple of numbers that look different, and I just want to make sure that I'm reading it correctly. So our Title I allocation in FY19 looks like it was $19.6 million, line 25, and we're projecting for FY20 that it's going to be $24.1 million. Is that, am I reading correctly that that's a $4.5 million increase in our Title I allocation?
Yes, sir.
And is that because we're receiving more money from the state, from the feds, for the same number of students, or what's the reason for that increase?
And I would invite Mrs. Harmon up here.
Oh, sorry. I promised her that I wouldn't make her come up here and speak on the microphone.
I believe it is I believe it is partially increased number of students qualifying, which qualifies us for more money, but Ms. Harmon will speak more directly to that. And I don't know if carryover is included in that line item or not.
You are correct, Dr. Royster. In regards to information that we received from the State Department, our fiscal year 20 poverty has increased. For fiscal year 20, it was 15,310, and for fiscal year 19, it was 12,159. So since our poverty has increased, therefore that allows us to receive an additional funding for fiscal year 20.
So in 1 year, the number of children in poverty in Greenville County increased by 2,200 kids?
The poverty, yes.
And
so,
so this isn't an increase in what we're getting per kid. This is an increase in the number of children who qualify for these dollars.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Meek.
Oh, wait, I'm sorry.
Oh, well.
No, it's fine. It's good. We're good.
You sure?
Sure.
Okay, Mr. Meek.
My question's on line number 10 on Roper Mountain. Can you give me a little explanation what we're doing over there? And is that for the whole state, teachers for the whole state?
Yeah.
Or is that just Greenville County?
Yes, sir. That's the Summer Science Institute that we operate at Roper Mountain, but it is for teachers throughout the state of South Carolina. The grant comes from the state to do that. Now, we also have teachers that attend both through that grant, and then we have for several years provided some staff development funds to send some additional of our teachers there. That's a statewide grant.
And is that, we don't lose any money on that?
Oh, no, sir.
Okay. Enough said. Thank you.
Wouldn't say we make any necessarily. We don't lose any money.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Dr. O'Connor.
A change in definition for why more students qualified, or the definition stayed the same and we actually had that many more poor children?
Yes.
It's very sad to hear. Thank you.
We have a motion on the floor properly made. All those in favor of the motion as stated, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Next item of business in order is item 6.19, audit firm procurement audit. Recommended motion from the administration is presented. Is there a maker?
Mr. Chairman, motion to approve the firm of McKinley, Cooper and Company, LLP, to audit the district's procurement activities for the period July 1, 2015 to June 30th, 2018.
Have a motion properly made and seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion as stated, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Next item of business in order is the Internal Auditing Services Project Status Report. Mr. Barber.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We issued 3 audit reports during the month of June. They were the EFA student classification, the Student Activity Fund analytical for fiscal year ending June 30th, 2018, and also the cash receipting and accounts receivable audit report. For calendar year 2018, we're working on the purchasing cards and risk management audits, and those are 40% and 5% complete respectively. Under the 2019 calendar year audit plan, we are working on student activity funds analytical for fiscal year ending June 30th, 2019, and the warehouse physical inventory, and both of those projects are 5% complete. The extended day program is projected to be a fall project, and student Chromebooks, we are gathering information.
Any questions? Thank you, Rick. I appreciate your help.
Thank you.
Are there any committee or liaison reports that we haven't already covered? Okay. Next item of business is item 9.01, monthly financial report. Since Dr. Royster has excused himself, Mr. Knotts.
I did not have any particular report, but it'd be my pleasure to answer questions that board members may have.
Do we have any questions of Mr. Knotts?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
I have one. Do you expect to miss us at all?
Okay.
He couldn't hear you.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
We expect to miss you more.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jeff, on a serious note to you and Terry Mills, are you still awake? Okay. Jeff, to you and Terry both, we appreciate your dedication and your service to this district for the years that you've served. You guys have both kept us out of some tight spots, both financially and operationally. And on behalf of this board, we appreciate your service very much. Enjoy your retirement. Now, one other that I wanted to single out, because if he'd have hung around for one more year, him and his wife would have had 100 years of collective service to this district. Chuck, thank you for what you've done, not only for the students, but for the adults in this district. You've done a wonderful job, and we hope you and Sandra have a lot of fun on those bicycles riding up down the beach. So enjoy your retirement. And to everyone else in the audience, I know you've been here since 7:30 this morning. You're going to be back at 7:30 in the morning. And thank you for your patience. At this time, the chair will entertain a motion that we adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Have a motion made and seconded. There better not be any discussion. Okay. All those in favor of the motion as stated?
Aye.
We now adjourn. Thank you very much, and have a good July.